You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Will this be the last night that Julian Assange, the world historic journalist, spends in the cold COVID hell of Belmarsh Prison? Tomorrow, a British judge in the Old Bailey will issue her verdict on whether or not the world's most significant political prisoner is deported to a lifetime of hell in a maximum security jail in the United States of America. We'll be talking to another world historic figure, Roger Waters, the founder of Pink Floyd, about the trials, the persecution, the crucifixion of Julian Assange. And of course, we'll be talking about the coronavirus as Britain now stands on the verge of another ice age lockdown, one which may reduce life in this island to almost nothing. We'll be talking to Caleb Maupin about the situation in the United States. Will the Congress steal the presidency for Donald J. Trump? And if they did, what would the consequences be? We'll be talking also about British politics in the round. Keir Starmer, Captain Hindsight, who said no ifs, no buts. Our children had to get back to school last autumn, is now demanding a total lockdown in the country. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours. It's going to be a bumpy ride because it's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. You can listen to us crystal clear in FM quality on 105.5 in the Washington, D.C. area, where President Donald Trump, with his housecoat, his slippers, and his Big Mac, is settling down right now to do just that. You can listen right across the United States, from burning city to burning city on AM. But you well may be one of the 500,000 and more people who now every single week, regularly, week in, week out, are watching as well as listening. If you are watching on Facebook, then please immediately share this broadcast with all of your friends, all of your contacts. You can watch on my own Facebook. You can watch on RT's multiple Facebook platforms. You can watch on YouTube. And if you're watching on my own YouTube channel, then please subscribe while you're at it. But you can also watch on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter. A record number of you did watch on Twitter last week. You can watch on Twitch, and you can listen to us all over the world, of course, on SputnikNews.com. And if you miss any, you can catch up. You might well want to clip the interview that I'm going to have with Roger Waters of Pink Floyd on Julian Assange. I suspect that that interview will become viral. Now, there's much to discuss tonight. The big news here is that Boris Johnson may very well put the country into the ice age of a new tier. Tier 5, Tier 6, Tier 7, who knows? The tiers of a clown. A lockdown that started too late and finished too early and has lurched, veered, ricocheted from one policy direction to another, It's only a couple of months ago that the country was paying people like me half my restaurant bills. Eat out to help out, they said. Though it may well turn out that we didn't help out at all. We may have helped out McDonald's, but we didn't help out all those people that caught the coronavirus in the crowded restaurants that we had paid people to go to. This government is in such a shambles that it first said the schools were going back tomorrow or later this week, and then quietly, with the stroke of an internet pen, told London parents that their children would not, after all, be going back next week or for the foreseeable. There are places in the country that are going back tomorrow, other places going back next week. Some, like Eton, the most expensive and famous public school in the world, by public I mean private, is not going back at all. And yet it would appear that absolutely nothing has been done to institute a series of learning online, or taking over a television station. Channel 5 springs to mind. Nobody watches it anyway. And teaching our children through the television so that they don't have to go to school, but neither do they have to revert to a feral state, learning nothing at all. Ditto with the vaccine. The vaccine for which, thank goodness, Britain has played a significant role, particularly at Oxford University. Thank God for Oxford University. Thank God it's in our country. Thank God for the people who came up with the Oxford University vaccine. But the problem now is even people in their 90s don't have a date by which they will get it. It would appear that despite praying for and knowing that one day we'd have a vaccine, nobody has prepared how we're going to deliver it. Can you believe that? They're now scrambling as to how to deliver a vaccine that we've known for months was in the pipeline. What kind of government is as stupid as that? Well, the kind of government we've got in Westminster and at Holyrood in Scotland, in Edinburgh. These two governments are now like rabbits in the headlights, not knowing when and to whom they are going to deliver this vaccine. My own mother, God preserve her, is 85 years old. And when I said on Twitter that despite constantly phoning her GP, her doctor, she has absolutely no idea when she's going to get it, how she's going to get it, I was then answered by a whole raft of people whose parents are even older than my mother, some in their 90s, who haven't heard a cheep from the government. And when you try to get an answer from the government, north and south, Edinburgh and London, answer comes there none. So if Boris Johnson does end all activity in this country this week, that may cut the infection rates, which seem to be vaultingly high. It may take pressure off the National Health Service. But for how long? According to the Scottish Government, people in their 50s will not get this vaccine until June of this year, until the summertime. And we're in the depths of winter. How can that be in a country of 5 million people? What are we going to do, lock down till June? If we do, what happens to life? What happens to commerce? What happens to industry? What happens to education? June, and that's the over 50s. The rest of you, go tell it to the Marines. I tell you, we have never been governed by a more motley, a more mercenary, and a more maddening crew than we currently are. It's no surprise to me that mental health problems in this country equally are vaulting, that suicides in this country equally are vaulting. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. We've got a poll on it. Should Boris Johnson announce a total lockdown this week? Yes or no? Or comment underneath my tweet as to what you think about this matter. The big news in the United States is that there's going to be a last-ditch effort to keep Donald Trump in the White House. Now, I don't think it's going to succeed, do you? Tell me if you do, either by phone or by Twitter. But there is going to be a serious effort made, and Trump is talking up the possibility that there will be no President Joe Biden. There will be no Vice President Kamala Harris. There will be no inauguration later in this month for the Democratic Party's presidency-elect. How can this be? How can the most powerful country in the world have institutions so unfit for purpose that even this day we do not know who is going to be the president by the end of this week? On the 6th, there's going to be a very big demonstration indeed. Trump, admittedly something which the hyperbole of whom is infamous, braggadocio even. He says there's going to be 1 million people there. If there is 1 million people there, will that demonstration get out of control? Given some of the elements that are flocking to his standards, there's every possibility of serious violence in Washington, D.C. For me, the United States has always been just another country. It's never been my father. It's never been my leader. I never recognized it as the leader of what they laughingly call the free world. But neither do I want to see the people of the United States, whom I love and know well, go into a tumultuous period of violence and uncertainty alongside a depression as great as that in the 1930s, alongside a deadly pandemic which is cutting them down in unprecedented numbers. Well over 300,000 people now dead in the United States. Some states of the United States, like Florida, like California, now have death rates far higher than many countries elsewhere in the world. So we'll be talking, as I said, to Caleb Maupin, my favorite American commentator, about what happens next in the United States. But the main burden of my remarks this evening, and I think the main topic of discussion, is what's going to happen at the Old Bailey in London tomorrow. Julian Assange not only committed no crime, he exposed crime. Not only is he not a criminal, he exposed the criminals. But the criminals have made it a crime to report on the crimes that they committed. Now, I was in the British Parliament and opposing the current extradition treaty that Britain has with the United States. I spoke to the man who wrote it, whose signature at least is on it. Now Lord Blunkett, then David Blunkett, the British Home Secretary, who introduced this new extradition treaty during the summer holidays when no one was there to hold them to account, to scrutinize its terms. But when I bearded him about the terms of the new extradition treaty, I laid out exactly the kind of case that we now have with Julian Assange. I said, the United States may very well seek to extradite either an American dissident who is opposing their foreign policy from Britain, or maybe even, I said, a complete foreigner who owes no allegiance to the United States, who's sworn no allegiance to the United States, committed no crime in the United States, may never have even been in the United States, might not even be British, might just be in London and be seized on the orders of the United States and extradited under your new treaty. He said to me, "Dear boy, you are panicking unnecessarily because it is written on the face of the treaty that political crimes are not extraditable." Well, what is Julian Assange accused of other than the political crime of exposing the war crimes of the United States empire? And not just the United States empire, but the crimes of people all over the world, public and private, friends and foes, were exposed by Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks that he founded and led. And therefore, it ought to have taken no more than a moment for the British judge to say to the US government, your bid for extradition fails because you're accusing this man of political offenses, and they are specifically proscribed in the treaty. But it hasn't taken but a moment. Julian Assange has been in a maximum security prison for well over 1 year and now shivers in the cold without his winter clothes, which lie in the basement of the jail and have not been given to him in absolute contravention of the law as an untried prisoner convicted of nothing. But coronavirus is swirling in the jail and cutting people down, staff and inmates alike, in alarming numbers. So tomorrow, she delivers her verdict after a series of proceedings which have oftentimes descended to tragedy and farce in the one play. The abuse of process, which I could adumbrate for the rest of the night, again should have seen the case thrown out of court without any further debate. Let me just give you two. The United States was spying on Julian Assange in the Ecuador embassy, including, most importantly, on his legal discussions with his lawyers about the charges being brought against him by the United States. End of story, end of trial. In any jurisdiction worthy of the name anywhere in the world, if the prosecuting authority have been spying, recording, and retaining the very words being spoken by the accused and his lawyers, the case falls. It's a corruption of the judicial process and would be anywhere else in the world. The second reason why the process itself should have been enough to bring this miserable saga to an end is that the United States was not just spying on Julian Assange, but openly, amongst themselves, plotted to kill him. And yet we're asked to believe that he can go to the United States on an extradition request and receive a fair trial. A fair trial, a man that the United States government openly discussed murdering in London in a sovereign embassy belonging to the South American state of Ecuador. And then there's the issues that he's going to be tried on in the United States themselves. And I sum it up in one sentence. Julian Assange should be given the Nobel Prize for revealing the crimes carried out in Afghanistan and in Iraq by the United States government and its allied governments. He shouldn't be prosecuted. He should be praised. He shouldn't be imprisoned. He should be enshrined as an example of what journalism and publishing is supposed to mean in a free society. It's all coming up over the next 2.5 hours or more here on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
This is a Christmas public service announcement from the UK government. Please indulge in a delicious Christmas dinner with the family, pigs in blankets, all of the trimmings. But if you have more than 3 children, I'm afraid only the favourite can eat indoors, takeaways and all that. You can see Granny, but we prefer it if you didn't. Perhaps stick her in the shed if you can. And if you live north of Milton Keynes in the UK, Christmas, I'm afraid, is cancelled. Or is it? Who knows? It'll probably all end in tears. We wish you a very Merry Christmas, but we better not catch you having a good one.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Let's go straight to New York City, to my favorite American commentator, broadcaster, writer, and political activist, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. Let me ask you about some breaking news. I don't know if you have heard it, but the president had a 1-hour conversation with the governor of Georgia, who recorded it and has now given it to the Washington Post, and we're expecting headlines in the morning. Did you catch that story?
Well, I did catch that Donald Trump is talking to swing states around the country and their legislatures about overturning the election results. That he basically is arguing that if swing states can decertify their electoral votes, that somehow this could be a last-ditch effort to overturn Biden's electoral victory. So the fact that he was on the phone with the governor of Georgia is certainly not surprising, and it'll be quite interesting to see, or rather to hear, what was said in that conversation, as it seems like Donald Trump is still trying to rally his supporters around the possibility that he could remain the president for the next 4 years.
Now he's rallying his supporters this week in Washington, D.C. He says 1 million people are going to come. But mind you, he said there was 1 million at his inauguration. So braggadocio is his middle name. But I think it's likely to be a significant demonstration. What say you?
Well, he certainly has been able to pull off some very effective mobilizations of the public among his supporters. D.C. Has seen some very, very big protests of Trump supporters lately. Now, that said, is he really capable of mobilizing enough support that he could actually stand in the wave of opposition, where even his own party doesn't really seem like they are fully behind keeping him in office? Ted Cruz is sympathetic to Donald Trump and his efforts to stay president, but it seems like beyond a few in the Republican Party and in Congress, he doesn't really have much support for these efforts.
That's the question I was going to ask you later. Let me ask it now. Is this not therefore pregnant with real problems inside the Republican Party? Because it's quite clear to me that Donald Trump is much more popular than the Republican Party, but the Republican Party have largely deserted him in this admittedly rather bizarre last-ditch effort to remain in office. Does that not presage a split of some kind?
Well, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump won't be going away. He may not be president of the United States for very much longer, but he's certainly not going to disappear. His movement of supporters is going to continue to exist, and the anger that they have at the other factions within the Republican Party, at the neoconservative wing, at the more centrist wing of the Republican Party, that is going to remain pretty well intact. And it points to the fact that we are in a crisis in the United States in both parties. In both parties, there seems to be a lot of anger among the rank and file and a lot of efforts to calm things down and defend the status quo at the top. And Donald Trump represents probably what most Republicans think, where most Republicans are sympathetic to Trump and not to the leaders of their party. And the same could be said in the Democratic camp, where Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and the rising Democratic Socialist opposition, they represent what most Democrats think, while the leadership, Nancy Pelosi and the incoming Biden administration, they represent a centrist current that is kind of out of touch with the average Democratic voter.
So you've got two parties, big tents, but where the people at the top of the tent, up the flagpole, are increasingly unrepresentative of the rest of the people in the tent. Is that a situation that can forever hold?
Well, I mean, it is a situation that is causing lots of tension, and you have to wonder how long will it hold. Look, Kamala Harris is going to be the vice president of the United States, and Joe Biden is not exactly a young man, so there's a very good chance Kamala Harris could soon be president. But let's remember that less than 1% of Democratic voters voted for her in the Democratic primary, less than 1%. But she could very soon be the next president. That shows a political system that isn't exactly representing the will of the people. And this boiling tension beneath the surface in both parties is spilling over into our streets. Look, 2020 is probably going to be looked back on as a turning point, because the amount of political violence we have seen in the United States in the previous year has not been small. When it came to the George Floyd protests, it came to, right-wing demonstrations, it came to what was going on the streets of Oregon. There has been an upsurge of political activism that often turns rather bloody in the streets of the United States of America. This is a situation boiling with tension.
And the economy, of course, is tanking.
Oh, of course. I mean, the unemployment rates, the fact that New York City is basically New York City, people describe it as the capital of capitalism. Wall Street is here. The UN is here. This is supposed to be the most prosperous center of the global economy. And you look outside, you see stores that are boarded up and closed down. You see mass unemployment. You see lines of people outside of Catholic charities desperately trying to get some food. You see homeless people, just crowds and crowds of homeless people desperately trying to get by. You see a city that has just been devastated by this pandemic and by the lockdowns. We've seen restaurant workers and restaurant owners protesting and saying that Bill de Blasio, our mayor, is not looking out for them. There's just widespread anger and unemployment, and a lot of the rich folks who live here in New York City, right? All those penthouses, all those luxury apartments, a lot of them are empty. The rich folks have packed up and gotten out of town because there's nothing here. You can't go to Broadway. You can't do any of the New York City things. You can't live the lifestyle, the nightlife that New York City is famous for. New York City is just crumbling amid this pandemic. And if New York City is suffering, imagine how things are in parts of the country that haven't always been so prosperous.
And Joe Biden doesn't have a plan for getting out of this, does he?
No. Joe Biden is coming in. His plan consists of making everyone wear a mask for the first 100 days, though he's only able to enforce that on federal. So he's coming in. Everyone's going to have to wear a mask. That's going to be his first agenda item. And other than that, we're not really hearing a clear plan. Now, what is interesting is many people are anticipating a crackdown. Already we've seen the Democratic mayor of Portland, who at first, it seemed like he was all for those protesters. He loved those protesters back over summer. He was with them. He was against the system. But now you look into what's going on. You listen to what's being said by the leadership in Seattle, in Portland, and other Democratic cities. It looks like that now that Donald Trump will be leaving office, there's a crackdown coming, right? Playtime is over. Protests were great when it was destabilizing things and hurting Donald Trump. But now that Trump is leaving office, the crackdown is coming. They're talking about swiftly cracking down on the growing unrest in the United States. The Democrats may very soon be locking up the protesters they were hugging yesterday.
Well, nobody cracks down like a Democrat cracked down. Those of us who remember the Chicago convention of the Democratic Party in 1968 could testify to that. But that will merely accentuate this division inside the Democratic Party that we talked about earlier. Is nobody setting up a new party, Caleb? Because it seems to me screamingly obvious that a People's Party, I know there is a project for one, but a People's Party is vitally needed now by the people.
Well, certainly. I mean, Cornel West, Jimmy Dore, and others have come forward with the People's Party as an alternative to the Democratic Party. That has been put forward. What I think is shocking is just how the comedian Jimmy Dore has called out the Democrats, called out the AOC and others for not fighting for Medicare for all. And there has just been an avalanche of rage and persecution poured on Jimmy Dore by the Democrats. They are just determined to silence him and not let him say what needs to be said, which is that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's blatantly obvious that health care should be a human right. The health of one is the health of all. And if you have a system where everyone's being told you're on your own, your health is your business, you're not going to be able to resolve health issues. In a pandemic, it's blatantly obvious we need Medicare for all in the United States. Jimmy Dore has stepped up and said what is obvious. And the response of the Democratic machine, not just the centrist wing, but even some of the so-called socialist wing of the Democratic machine has just been an avalanche of trying to silence him. But yet he has maintained his position. He has not backed down. And polls are showing that despite being told not to, average Democrats agree with Jimmy Dore. So this tension is boiling over in the Democratic Party. It's boiling over on the streets of the United States. We've got Donald Trump, who may be leaving office, but certainly won't be leaving American politics. This is America in 2021 as we face a new year.
I mean, we are two people divided by a common language, but some of the audience, the British audience at least, will be scratching their head about this. After all, we got Medicare for all, called the National Health Service, in 1945. Yeah? And you are describing a situation where a comedian, a very good one, a radio TV host, a very good one, but not a politician, he demands Medicare for all, and the Democrats come down on him like a ton of bricks. It's very difficult to understand that, Caleb.
Indeed. I mean, we in the United States have been told over and over and over again that if we have what you have over in the United Kingdom, if we adopt a national health service, this will mean full communism. It'll be Stalinism. People will not get health care. They'll be in lines, dying on waiting lists. We have just been told every horror story, and the power of the big pharmaceutical companies and the big health insurance groups and the big money involved in preventing the USA from adopting health care for all. That power is very, very hard to roll back. And even some of the voices that on paper say they advocate it are not comfortable, with Jimmy Dore, a well-loved comedian, coming forward and saying, why don't you fight for it? And that has been his demand. He said, put your money where your mouth is. If you really want Medicare for all, now is the time to come out swinging. amid this pandemic. That's all he said, but they simply won't have it. It shows how much, despite public opinion in the United States favoring a shift in the healthcare services, despite all of that, it shows how much the United States is not exactly a pure democracy. There is the rule of big money and big lobby groups. They have a lot of power when it comes to the American political process, no doubt about it.
You're not getting much health for your buck. The U.S. spends more on healthcare than anybody else in the world, and yet the outcomes for scores of millions of people are as you have described them. In the middle of a pandemic, there are people who don't have health insurance.
Oh, it was unbelievable. At the beginning, people who weren't insured were being charged thousands and thousands of dollars for getting a test. They were coming back from their travel. Maybe they were in China, maybe they were overseas. They came back to the United States, and of course, they did the responsible thing. They got a test to make sure they didn't have it, and then they'd be stuck with a bill of thousands of dollars. This is just completely irrational. This is completely irrational, but it's the rule of the dollar. This is free market economics, neoliberalism, Adam Smith politics and economics in practice, and it was a disaster. And we're living with the aftermath of it here in New York City as the city remains locked down, and so many are suffering around the country. So many are unemployed. It's quite a nightmare.
Caleb, finally, and I'm grateful for your time. This time next year, who'll be the president? Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris?
That's a very good question. I think that it's very likely it'll be Kamala Harris, but we shall see. We shall see what happens as events develop and transgress in the coming months.
Caleb Maupin, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should Boris Johnson announce a total lockdown this week? Yes, 48%. No, 52%. Very, very interesting. Anyway, here's the numbers. 02077 982 255 if you're in the United Kingdom. That's 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both of us. Right after this break, I'm going to be talking to Roger Waters. You don't want to miss that.
Look at these reviews. An intermediate masterpiece.
No way out.
A surprise smash.
No way out.
It was shocking, courageous, inclusive, and I loved every minute of it.
No way out.
How could this happen? The show was lousy and long, and we did everything wrong. Where did we go right?
Christmas came early to broadcasting this year, and guess who they stuffed in our stocking? George Galloway.
It was so crass and so crude, even Murdoch would have booed. Where did we go right?
Last year, a radio star was reborn on the airwaves, the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. A new show, Moats Extra George Galloway Bare Knuckle. We predict the new show's name will soon be up in lights, if they can find enough bulbs. We searched Britain on and off for a lady with a cough. We had callers and reporters by the score. We were so enthusiastic to build a set made out of plastic. If anyone spoke sense, well, we sent them out the door.
They shouted, hooray, that socialist on display. Where did we go right?
When they asked for one more day, we nearly ran away. Where did we go right?
A show so easy to despise.
Now it's up for the Pulitzer Prize. Oh, where, tell us where did we go right?
The best new program of the decade. George Galloway is a political genius. Now they like him. Oh, we knew it wouldn't sell.
We broadcast in Israel. It's the end of our career.
It'll run for 20 years.
Tell us where did we go right?
and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, very shortly indeed, I'll be talking to Roger Waters, the founder, the lyricist, the creative force, really, behind one of the very biggest and greatest musical ensembles ever in human history. Pink Floyd sold, I don't know how many tens, scores of millions of records. But Roger Waters is not just a great musician. He's a man who follows what's happening in the world, and he has, right from the beginning, been interested in the fate of Julian Assange. So coming up shortly in a minute or two. But some comments, first of all, on the US. There has never been a good Democrat president in over 60 years. And Michael says it's scary to think what happens behind the closed doors of the White House. And Lee says, what a choice for the Americans. Either a Rothschild bailed out Trump or a Chinese-funded Biden. There is no lesser of two evils. They are equally as bad as each other. Puppets for the financial elite. And Jennifer says Trump would release Assange, Biden and the Dems would not. Jack says expose war crimes, you go to jail. Commit them, you get promoted. And Nick says, I don't think many people support Trump as much as hate the idea of another Bush-Clinton criminal in charge. And Kerso says, the whole UK should go back to the way it was in March, plus maybe curfews added. Let me know what you think of that. George says, I'm afraid if there were another lockdown, it would be as ineffective as the others. As I understand, public health is at risk. It gets harder and harder to keep faith in restrictions the government provides, as it's simply a cycle of going from bad to worse. And Andy says, we've been getting told for the past 6 months that January could be the breaking point. And Roger says, what difference is a full lockdown to the current restrictions? Or will there be curfews this time? And Gavin says, yes, how bad will infections get and therefore deaths if we don't? Vaccine efforts need to be ramped up massively. And Karen says, am I the only one who remembers the first lockdown, the real one that brought cases and deaths down to tiny numbers by the summer? Why don't we do this again, only this time we vaccinate each other instead of watching Netflix? And Buck says, no, lockdowns and restrictions aren't working. We need to fully open up again as soon as possible. Roger Waters joins me now, and I'm grateful to him. Roger, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. This is a big night. It's either Julian's final night behind bars, if the verdict goes his way tomorrow, or it's merely the end of the beginning, because if the court finds against him and seeks to extradite him tomorrow, one presumes that that verdict will be appealed, that that appeal will last a very long time, and that Julian may or may not be given bail. He's your friend, he's my friend. What must he be thinking in the cell this evening?
I dread to think, George. By the way, you could tell your production people I can't see you, which is irritating because I was really looking forward to seeing your smiley face. But that's beside the point. I don't know. What would you be thinking if it was you? I mean, how long's he been banged up?
Well, more than a year. What I'd be thinking is this. Either that judge is the greatest actress since Greta Garbo, and she's going to free me tomorrow, having given every impression to the contrary, or she really is going to throw the book at me tomorrow. And it's most probably the latter. Is that how you see it?
Well, you know, the informed opinion tells us that it doesn't really matter. I mean, it would be great if she said, no, you can't be extradited. But assuming she doesn't, it will be appealed. Even if she does say you can't be extradited, the state will appeal it anyway. They're not going to suddenly tell the Americans to F off no, we're not going to do your bidding anymore. We're going to let him go and he can live with his family, go back to Sarah and the kids and blah, or move to Australia or do whatever he wants. He is, after all, just a publisher, just a journalist. But they're not going to do that. They will appeal it. So whatever happens tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., this is willy-nilly going to drag on. We did have, I say we, I wasn't there sadly, but I did write a statement that was read out in front of the UK consulate on 2nd Avenue in New York about 3 hours ago. I've just heard from my friends who were there that it went very well. There were a lot of people there. So I'm happy to say there are people in spite of COVID, taking to the streets over this issue, as we have all been doing for month after month after month. I mean, the fact that Julian is banged up when he's only, the only thing they've been able to charge him with at all is a minor bail infringement is absolutely insane. Sorry,
You're absolutely correct that he has spent well over a year in prison on top of the 1 year that he was given for the bail infringement, which itself was at the very edge of the usual punishment for a bail infringement. So if you include the time that he spent inside that embassy, and the time he spent in Belmarsh, he's already done well over 10 years of bird. Now, even if he'd done something really bad, most people would think, well, that's enough. But given that he only did things that were really good, it's intolerable, and it makes you ashamed to be British.
It certainly does. And this, George, is why you and I have to remain true to who we are. You and I have never met, but I've always admired you, partly because you're a blowhard. You call a spade, you see what you think. You don't mind making yourself unpopular in certain quarters, but to do the kind of job that you try and do and I try and do in my own small way, you have to become unpopular in certain quarters. And if I ever become popular in the corridors of power, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in Whitehall in London, then I will have not been doing my job properly.
You have done a magnificent job. You are by far and away the most prominent person in cultural life on both sides of the Atlantic to lend your unyielding support to Julian. Pamela Anderson, ditto. But for the most part, are you surprised, because I am, at the number of people in what you might call the liberal professions, the liberal arts, who have simply abandoned Julian to this fate?
No, I'm not. The propaganda to which we are all subjected 24/7, all of us, is extraordinarily effective and extraordinarily insidious. The number of people who, when Julian comes up in conversation, particularly women, I have to say, wrinkle a bit. I go, what was that wrinkling going on? The nose thing, what? Do you smell something? And they immediately start coming up, well, I mean, he's a rapist, isn't he? Well, he was accused of rape, but no, he wasn't. So, but the fact is that the smearing that they've done over these last years, certainly since 2016, with Julian Assange, has been incredibly effective. And so people believe it. And their views about him are completely tainted by the smear job that's been done. Bit like Jeremy Corbyn in the last election. Without the smear done on Jeremy Corbyn by the Israeli lobby, we would probably have a left-wing prime minister in England now, instead of Keir, Blair clone Starmer. Anyway, that's entirely another topic, and I shouldn't drift over to it. But
no,
the propaganda,
the propaganda works. There's no doubt about that. Advertising works, and that's legalized lying, as Orwell put it. And propaganda works, or they wouldn't be doing it. But they chose the smear well, didn't they? If they'd said Julian had shoplifted in Woolworths, or if he'd banjoed somebody outside the pub, that would have been far more quickly forgiven. The fake allegation of a sex crime, which, by the way, neither of the two women involved ever said that he raped them, yet this word rapist is now indubitably linked to Julian Assange, and you and I are therefore rape apologists for supporting Julian Assange, who never raped anyone.
Of course he didn't. And the great witness to this, of course, is Niels Meltzer, who when he was first asked as a torture rapporteur for the United Nations to look into the Assange case, he found himself wrinkling his nose and going, oh, wasn't that chap who raped those women in Sweden? Luckily, he looked into it and he realized that he had been duped. Now, this is an extraordinarily eloquent and sophisticated political animal who had been duped by it all. And so when he bears witness on the subject, and he speaks fluent Swedish, and he went there and looked into it all, and he has written extensively about it. And so this is a witness whose testimony we should absolutely accept, but we should also accept his testimony because it's his job, and he does it very well, that the man is being tortured by the United Kingdom government and has been for nearly 2 years now. So the whole thing is completely scandal. It's an absolute scandal. But what's more important about it is this: if the pen is not found to be mightier than the sword, and if it is found to be mightier than the sword, then Julian Assange will be freed today or tomorrow morning, then we can all start worrying about the end of times, because it will signal the end of the freedom of the press. The fourth estate will cease to exist. If this case goes against humanity, because this is a case that is being fought between the whole of humanity, of whom Julian Assange happens to be one member, and the cabal, the oligarchs who run the world through the government of the United States of America. That's my view.
Are you because we're both British, both done certain age, we never thought much, I suppose, of our governments down the years, some better than others, some worse than others. But do you, like me, have some lingering hope in the judicial system? I put it this way: the last uncorrupted British institution is surely, at least one must pray that it is, the judicial system.
Oh my God, we're going back to 1215 and then 1297, the ratification of the Magna Carta. I don't know, George. Oh my God, I would hope so. I would hope so, and I can tell that you hope so too. At least we don't have a Supreme Court that is that is formed and appointed as political appointees by the executive branch of government, like they have in the United States. And at least we don't have Citizens United in the United Kingdom. So our judicial system has a lot better chance of remaining impartial and retaining some kind of a connection with the written law and the laws of precedent. So we're better off than the Americans, but nevertheless, it is clearly capable of manipulation, even from across the pond by the powers that be in Washington, in the way that this magistrate barrister has been manipulated by them through the machinations of all the old Etonians who are still running government in the United Kingdom.
Quite so. It's because of that I've been genuinely surprised by how badly the British have behaved. I thought that they would at least attempt to show some decorum in all of this. But they have been as mean as could possibly be. They have, I said earlier, it's bitterly cold. He's got winter clothes in the basement of the jail, and they won't give the clothes to him. He waited a whole year for a radio to which he was entitled on day one as an untried prisoner. The abusive process in Barrister's Court, the way in which the public have been locked up. It's almost as if the British side has been going out of its way to say to Donald Trump, we're just as mean as you are.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But George, we keep coming back to the power of the mainstream media and to the extraordinary efficiency of the propaganda campaigns, which have become central to every breath we take. You know, they control our lives through this insidious planting of false information under our noses all day, every day. And it is turning us into people who within our, I have a sort of optimistic attitude towards human beings. I believe that eventually we will sniff out what will bring us joy. And what brings us joy is not an ability to attach to the vindictive side of our natures, but it's actually to attach to our capacity for empathy. And that we find if we do a brother or a sister a good turn, that is what brings joy to our lives. And that is what gives us the strength to move on to another day. That is what I firmly believe. However, we are sold, we are sold the idea that to be selfish and mean and grab everything that you can and show no interest in justice or freedom or democracy or the truth or liberty or any of those things that we would espouse. Just get on. Make a few friends in high places. Make sure you make a few quid. Tuck it away. Don't share it with any blah, 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 blah. That will make you happy. It doesn't. It doesn't. This does not bring joy to your life. What does bring joy to your life is like my comrades standing in the freezing cold on 2nd Avenue this morning outside the UK consulate, demonstrating on behalf of Julian Assange, a great journalist and a great human being. That will have brought them joy this morning. And it will bring joy to everybody who fights for truth and liberty and freedom and justice. All the things that, for instance, the United States of America pretends it cares about, but signally couldn't care less about. So I have some hope for the future and for the coming generations.
Well, Julian Assange has written his name in the stars. He is a part of our history. We hope that he goes on to live a full family life. You and me sitting in his front room, you strumming your guitar, me blowing my saxophone. I really pray and hope for that. But even if that doesn't happen, it's my view that this case and this man, Julian Assange, will be remembered forever. And so to you, who long ago wrote your name in the stars, you've done so doubly by being so committed to this case. Roger Water, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. God bless you.
Thanks, George.
Thanks,
George. Cheers.
I got quite emotional there, as you could probably tell. That was Roger Waters of Pink Floyd talking about the Julian Assange case, which reaches some kind of conclusion tomorrow, albeit a preliminary one. Either Julian is freed tomorrow and walks out at least pending an appeal by the government, by the US government, because it would be utterly unconscionable not to bail a man whose extradition you have just refused. Or he is ordered to be extradited and is continued in Belmarsh prison, separated from his wife and children for another year or maybe two, while this matter winds its way through the British appeal process. But there is a third option. It could be that the judge will find in favour of Julian on the more serious charges, national security charges, but find against him on the computer hacking charges, which carry a 5-year sentence rather than a 175-year sentence. If she were to so find, then surely bail would be ineluctable, because you can't keep somebody in Belmarsh prison year after year after year because they might have given somebody a clue in the United States of how to get round a password. That would hardly be proportionate. That would hardly be justice. I'll be right back after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
COVID restrictions in England are probably about to get tougher to curb rising infections, the Prime Minister has warned. Boris Johnson said harsher measures may be required in parts of the country in the coming weeks. Tougher restrictions in Scotland, including a total lockdown, may be announced tomorrow. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has recalled Parliament and is expected to announce the new measures. The Prime Minister said the new measures in England included the possibility of keeping schools closed, although he said this is not something that the government wants to do. He urged parents to send their children to primary school tomorrow, saying that there was no doubt in his mind that the schools are safe. But the Prime Minister indicated tougher measures could be on the way, adding that the government had to be realistic about the spread of the new variant of the virus. He said increasing vaccination would provide a way out of restrictions and that he hoped tens of millions would be vaccinated in the next 3 months. Johnson also said that he stuck by his previous prediction that the situation would be better by the spring. He said he expects tens of millions of COVID-19 vaccinations will be given out in the next 3 months. People across the UK will start to receive the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine from tomorrow, when 530,000 doses will be ready at GPs and hospitals. But questions remain over the policy shift on whether the second dose of the Oxford and Pfizer jabs is given. More than 40 MPs have written to number 10 Downing Street seeking clarity on the changes. Asked if it was correct that 2 million people a week would need to be vaccinated to end restrictions, Boris Johnson said that he hopes that it would be possible to do tens of millions in the course of the next 3 months. He said that the UK had been the first country to have pioneered a room temperature vaccine in the Oxford jab, which he said offered real hope for the future. Liverpool's leaders have called on the government to impose a new nationwide lockdown to halt the spread of the new variant of COVID-19. Acting Mayor Wendy Simon and the City Council's cabinet said that urgent action is needed because the rise of coronavirus had reached alarming levels. They said it was self-evident the tier system had not curbed the variant. It had been concentrated in London and South East England, but is believed to be spreading in the north. Cases in Liverpool have almost trebled in the past 2 weeks. US Vice President Mike Pence has welcomed an effort by a group of senators to refuse to certify Joe Biden's presidential election win. The 11 Republican senators and senators-elect, led by Ted Cruz of Texas, want a 10-day delay to audit unsubstantiated allegations of election fraud. The move is certain to fail, as most senators are expected to endorse Biden's win in Wednesday's vote. Biden, a Democrat, is due to be inaugurated as president on the 20th of January. But President Donald Trump has refused to concede the November 3rd election, repeatedly alleging voter fraud without providing any evidence. Pence has stopped short of echoing allegations of election fraud, but on Saturday, his chief of staff, Mark Short, said Pence shared what he called the concerns of millions of Americans about voter fraud and irregularities. 87-year-old veteran broadcaster Larry King has tested positive for coronavirus and is being treated at a hospital in Los Angeles, according to US media. Sources close to his family told ABC News and his former employer CNN that he has been at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center for over a week. 5 bodies have been found in the search for the missing following a massive landslide that destroyed homes in Norway, police have said. 4 bodies were discovered on Friday and Saturday and another one on Sunday morning. The first victim to be found was named as 31-year-old Eric Granol. 5 people remain missing following the hillside collapse that sent mud into the village of Ask on Wednesday. Rescuers continue their search for survivors. 2 men base jumped from the rooftop bar of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Nashville on Friday, causing a mass panic among the bar's patrons, police said. Hotel security told police that 2 men approached the ledge of the rooftop bar on the hotel's 25th floor on Friday evening and jumped off. When the men jumped, patrons at the bar started screaming and there was a mass panic, according to the police report. Witnesses looked over the ledge of the building and saw the 2 men parachuting across the road to an adjacent parking lot. Once they landed, they got into a parked car and drove off. Many parts of England have now seen snow flurries accompanying the arrival of the new year. Areas which welcomed 2021 with several centimetres of snow included Northumberland, parts of Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. The Met Office has warned worse is to come, with more wintry showers forecast. Driving conditions on many roads will become hazardous as the cold weather continues next week. Several football matches were cancelled this weekend due to frozen pitches. Large parts of Scotland have also experienced snowfalls and icy conditions, including the largest city, Glasgow. And finally, a family of 5 made a narrow escape when a small plane crashed into their house in Lyon Township, about 40 miles west of Detroit in the USA. 3 people in the plane died, the pilot and 2 passengers. The family of 5 living in the home made it out alive, but their house was engulfed in flames. The mother said that the family was inside when the plane crashed. She said that they were in the living room arguing over which movie to watch and had just moved into a different room when the plane struck the house, burying into the living room that they had just left. Had the mother, the father and 3 children stayed in the room, it would have been a very different story. Sadly, the family's cat wasn't so lucky. And that's the latest on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Another big bad week on the coronavirus, and the poll is attracting very large numbers. Should Boris Johnson announce a total lockdown this week? Yes, 47%. No, 53%. 2,081 of you have voted on that. You can vote for the next hour or so on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, because the coronavirus is right at the front of the news cycle, we've moved forward. Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, physician, surgeon, and brilliant explainer of how we got to where we are. Dr. Ranjeet, thank you very much indeed for joining us at an earlier hour. What do you think of this lockdown business, first of all? Lockdown in principle, is a legitimate tactic if other things are being done alongside them. The question is, in the absence of the other things, are we just throwing good money after bad with these?
George, good to be with you, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
To all your viewers, but perhaps doesn't seem like a very happy new year given the set of circumstances that are conspiring against us, and coronavirus very much being foremost among them. I think your question about lockdown is really pertinent, and if you see the response to your poll, that probably reflects how we all feel, which is essentially ambivalent. The obvious thing to start by saying is I wouldn't have started from here. You look at China, you look at the way some countries have handled this, and the fact that with public health measures, we simply didn't have to suffer in this way. And I quite agree with your introduction that really our government bear the lion's share of the blame for that. Yes, we're facing a natural disease, but the way in which economies, the way in which countries have responded to it has been absolutely key. That said, we're here now. In the last week, if we look at the numbers in Britain, there's been over 1/3 test-proven cases in our country alone. That's an unprecedented number. So we're not at the end of this particular wave. No one would doubt now we're in a second wave. Very few people. Occasionally, I'm still getting people who are telling me there is no such thing as coronavirus, or coronavirus is just an excuse for social or draconian measures. And of course, none of us want to be in a lockdown. But the numbers are huge. The numbers in our hospitals, in the beds now, occupying our beds, are disrupting the whole service once again. I'm a surgeon who deals with emergency and acute care issues, but I'm having increasing problems dealing with my patients operatively because more and more of the hospital capacity is taken up dealing with coronavirus. If we look nationally, there's probably in the region of 25,000 people with coronavirus in our hospitals. To put that in context, as we've discussed before, our bed base has shrunk massively. And whereas we used to have in excess of 350,000 beds just 30 years ago, and now we have 140,000. But actually, many of those are maternity, day case, mental health beds. So if you look at the number of acute care beds in England, it's probably around 100,000. So that means 1 in 4, a quarter of our entire bed capacity and quarter of our medical care capacity is taken up currently looking after patients with coronavirus. Some of them have other illnesses as well, but they have coronavirus. And they're an extremely high-risk population group. I was looking at the population figures for just how many people in the UK might be at an increased risk, because as we know, overall, the virus mortality is 1%. Some say low, some say higher. It becomes higher, particularly at the points when our hospitals are overwhelmed and we're offering poor care to people as a result. But if you look at the number of people in this country over 65, it's almost 12 million, and the number over 80 is 3.2 million. So this second wave has a long way to run. I agree with you. We should be doing more to isolate patients and keep them safe. There are, of course, the prospects of vaccination now. So if we do manage to isolate those who are most risk and vaccinate those who are at most risk rapidly, that is a strategy for protecting the population and vastly reducing the toll. But I myself am ambivalent, given the fact that our lockdown hasn't really been a lockdown. The measures, as you say, have been late, ineffectual. All the time, schools and work has remained open, the eat out to help out. All of these things would have enabled the virus to spread in a rampant manner. And yes, of course, there's increasing coverage of the fact that there's a new variant. The new variant is increasing as a percentage of the total cases, and therefore there may be a factor attributable to the new variant. But overwhelmingly, it's been a poor public health response that has led us to this point. Having got to this point, it's very hard to argue that nothing should be done, George.
Yes, on the vaccine question now, I was gobsmacked this afternoon to learn that over 50s in Scotland might get vaccinated in June. Now, it's only just January. We've got millions on order. How could it take so long? Why are they so incompetent that even people in their 90s have not been told yet how and when they might be able to get a vaccine?
I think that's right, George. So it's still the numbers of vaccines. So, first of all, I want to say many vaccines have been developed quickly, though we could have secured other vaccines cheaper and earlier than we have done. Nevertheless, we have vaccines now. I myself, as I said, have received the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, but only about 600,000 people have had their first dose. And there's only really enough to administer the second dose to those people of that vaccine. As you say, we've now had the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine also approved, and it will be in larger numbers. But despite saying for many months that there were mass manufacturing in advance of approval to ensure there would be adequate stocks available, this doesn't seem actually to be the case. And the numbers available are relatively small. And certainly there are not enough vaccines at the moment in the country even to vaccinate the over 80s. And so we have this situation where even the very vulnerable, even though we have the beginnings of a vaccination program, we're still struggling to meet the needs of the healthcare population, the health providers, and the very vulnerable, the most vulnerable members of the population.
But there's no reason why that should be so, is there? If we treated this like 1940, or 41 rather, when the entire economy was moved on to a war footing, where every public space was requisitioned, where every able-bodied man and woman was utilized, if we worked this 24/7, and we produced, manufactured 24/7, we could do better than next June for the over 50s, couldn't we?
No, we absolutely could, George, even if you look at the way in which an interesting article I saw in the Times pointing out that what are the problems in the supply chain, that there are a number of different companies involved in producing the vaccine within England, a number of different companies involved of bottling the vaccine, splitting the doses, mass manufacturing, then logistics companies involved. So if you look at the supply chain, many different contractors and subcontractors. This is not just a national effort. This is an effort of many, much as we saw the disaster with the rolling out of PPE, because it all had to be done through the private sector with huge profits being allocated to small companies. We're seeing a similar thing even with the supply chain of individual vaccines. And this is having a big impact on our ability. We don't have a national pharmaceuticals organization which is engaged in production. Rather, we are simply a buyer, a purchaser, tendering to the private sector and at the mercies of the private sector. If the private sector find it most advantageous in terms of their profit to organize the supply chain in a certain way, we have no ultimate influence over that other than begging and pleading or throwing huge grants and huge amounts of money in the direction of the private sector. And that, I'm afraid, will continue to characterize the response of this government, whose entire ethos is one of encouraging the private sector to make money hand over fist, while we must suffer the consequences, unfortunately, George.
I saw that article to which you refer. It turns out that some of the vaccine being made here is sent to Europe to get bottled and then has to come back here and so on. My goodness, thank God we were better able in 1941, or we'd be having this conversation in German.
It doesn't make any sense, George. When I published that article, I met some people online who told me I was being prejudiced or kind of anti-EU in my sentiment. Well, I am anti-EU as a political organisation. I'm not against any people of Europe, but for publishing it and making a point out of it, I mean, it seems ridiculous, doesn't it, to supply something to our own citizens that is manufactured here. It has to go to the four corners of the earth or even the four corners of Europe and then come back to us. Even on an environmental basis alone, who thinks that's a good idea, that it should get on trucks and be ferried halfway around the world, get on trucks, ferried halfway back again? Who thinks that's going to make it more efficient? Who's going to think that's going to increase its or make its carbon footprint better? It's just the whole way in which our industry has been devolved and outsourced in order to maximize profit. Serves the interests of a very few companies, but doesn't serve the interests of the population. And this is just one area in which you look, and there's a lot of scrutiny on it right now, but actually that affects every aspect of our daily lives, every aspect of our production, and every aspect of this current madness, really, of a system which is so profit-orientated. It flies in the face of simple human logic.
How bad can this all get, Doctor? I mean, are we in the situation where we might all, more or less, all get it, and 1% of us will die? Because that's a lot of people.
I mean, I very much hope that's not the case, George. I think the vaccine offers us some way out. But of course, the vaccine, at the moment, there will be no one really who's taken the vaccine who is yet immune. And we're seeing these unprecedented numbers. Very sad to say, on the 30th of December, almost 1,000 people again died, 981. If we look at the number of deaths over a week, it's in excess of 4,000. So the numbers of deaths, numbers of cases, they're unquestionably accelerating. And it's only public health measures at the moment that will save us from this second wave. The vaccine really is aiming to cut down on the anticipated third wave. So we have to cut the ground from underneath the feet by decreasing the number of people who are susceptible to it. But at the moment, our government has shown very poor leadership. There doesn't seem to be anyone holding them to account from the political world. Certainly the opposition are doing no such thing. So it is very much a question of devil take the hindmost. I know my colleagues are struggling manfully in order to use the resources they have within the National Health Service to treat everyone that they can, but it's not within their purview to make these drastic measures of reorganizing the health sector. If you look at the numbers of patients being admitted to hospitals, it's striking when you look down the list within the UK. The NHS hospitals are burdened with huge numbers of COVID patients. Private hospitals are remained open. They've been contracted huge sums from the NHS budget, really, to stay open, to handle some aspects of care. But they don't have any COVID patients. They're not helping to deal with the COVID situation. They're performing a few, perhaps, elective operations on a very inefficient basis. But we certainly haven't commandeered hotel space. We haven't found ways of socially isolating people and supporting them to stop this spreading, the most basic public health measures, because they essentially would challenge the profit of those people who currently own those hotel spaces, those healthcare sectors. And that is something that seems to be a red line that our government is incapable of crossing, no matter how grave the situation they face currently is, George.
A couple of calls, if you would, Doctor. Eve in Idaho on the subject of vaccination. Eve, welcome back to the show. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Hello, doctor. First, I want him to thank him for all those great explanations. It's very clear and very instructive. My question is the following. You know, those vaccines have been on the fast track, and I don't have the number with me, but it seems that all the trials have been done with people, let's say, in the middle range, and very, very few people over 80 years old. So all those nice numbers that we hear are for people who are much less than 80 years old. So my question is, don't you think it would be a little dangerous to test a vaccine on a certain sample of population which is safe, and after, in first priority, to give it to people which are very old? That's
Good question. Good question, Eve. Doctor?
Eve, thanks so much for your question. I think it's entirely reasonable. And as I discussed with George last week, George has a very good feeling about this vaccine, and I fundamentally do too, because it's cheap and it has proved safe. But you're right, the overwhelming majority of the people in the trial of AstraZeneca vaccine were less than 55. A very small number were over 55, and I think there were no over 80-year-olds in the trial. So there's no perfect trial which has a perfect design. There have been many different tests performed on the vaccine in terms of looking at its antibody response that it's elicited, many in terms of the safety and efficacy. And now we'll add to that over the next coming period a large part of the population who will be vaccinated. I think, we have to weigh up the pros and cons of performing a perfect trial. There is no perfect trial that will reflect the entire population of the world, other than vaccinating the population of the world. It's a bit like the statistics around polling, if you like. There's no perfect poll that will reflect the outcome of an election. There's no perfect trial that will tell you whether a medicine is absolutely safe or absolutely not safe. I think we've got enough information to know that it's essentially a pretty safe vaccine. But you're right, there will be an ongoing period of scrutiny and surveillance, just as we saw when the Moderna vaccine was rolled out. We had a couple of cases of of allergy, and had to be very wary of that. And since then, we've said, look, people who have a particular allergic history probably shouldn't have the vaccination. But actually, as far as I can gather, and I don't know how perfect the process of reporting is, as far as I can gather, there haven't been a huge number of adverse effects. That's borne out by my experience, my family's experience, my patients' experience. So I'm becoming increasingly confident as larger and larger numbers have the vaccines of their safety and efficacy. As we know, the Chinese vaccine, the Russian vaccine, are very safe. The AstraZeneca vaccine is very similar, actually, to the Russian Sputnik 5 vaccine. So I'm relatively confident. How efficacious it is depends on the dose, it depends on the regime, and so we will find out all of these things. But they're all medicines, all will be imperfect tools, but I think they're currently the best we have. We'll look at everything on a risk-benefit basis, and at the moment, my judgment, my balance of risk and benefit is in favour of having it. I think it should be left up to each individual to weigh that evidence themselves. Some patients will take the overall opinion of the healthcare community. Other patients are very much of their own mind. They will probe the data. My own sister is like that. She will probe the data. She will read trials. She will sometimes go and see the doctor even about simple things with sometimes more knowledge than the doctor themselves. But equally, you have to understand that even looking at the trial data, you have to weigh that in light of clinical and scientific expertise and experience, which will give you a better overall understanding. I think it should be left to every individual. Not everyone will want to take it. They can assess their own risk, and they can absolutely should be able to deny the option of having the vaccine. At the moment, there are far more demand, far more people want to have the vaccine. They feel themselves to be at high risk. And as far as we can tell from the people who've had the vaccine, from the trials, my overall assessment is that they're relatively safe, despite all the reservations that I've had, that we've talked about, the incomplete nature of the trials, which vaccines are being run out. I do think that the vaccines that are currently being given are safe, and there's overwhelming, at the moment, the balance is in favour of having rather than not having. If that situation changes through our experience, of course, we should change our opinion.
Thank you very much, Yves, and thank you, Doctor. One last question for you, Doc. Breed is in Ireland. Breed, welcome.
Hello there. Just a question for the doctor. Doctor, I was just wondering, are you bothered by the fact that there's no, because I am, that there's no actual scientific consensus yet as to the origins of this virus? And I just came across recently information from Professor Luc Montagnier, who was the co-discoverer of the HIV virus. And according to him, he's now retired, but according to him, there's evidence of, genetic elements of the HIV virus actually in the COVID-19 virus. And he said that there was no way that was that could have been, an accident, that was manipulated in a lab, which of course we know that it was released somewhere near the Wuhan lab. But his opinion, doctor, is that in his opinion, that a vaccine is not going to be efficacious because if it's an unnatural virus, this COVID-19, then what he said is that it's going to be worked out through nature, and that nature will eliminate it naturally. But obviously, sadly, hundreds of thousands of people may die from it. But that a vaccine, when we don't fully understand what the virus and how it originated, that a vaccine is actually something that people should be very, very cautious about. I was wondering what your thoughts would be about that.
Thanks for your question. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the HIV vaccine, the virus, because, of course, it's another good example of a virus which has come about within our memory, within our lifetime, was something that wasn't a known human disease and then became very much a human disease that caused a lot of problem, anxiety and concern. And there's still no scientific consensus on the precise origin of that virus. So what there is no doubt about is that HIV virus is real. And it's a health problem that we faced. And the more that we learned about it, the more we were able to develop medicines in order to limit it. And of course, public health strategies enable to limit its spread. And I don't think we necessarily need to know. And there would be no other diseases really that we know the precise and full natural history of, any more than we know the full natural history of the origins of the human race, of life itself, of the universe. All of these things are things that we need to keep on working on and postulate. But it does not mean, because we don't know the precise origin, that a vaccine won't work, because if it's a particle that we can study, if it's a virus that we can understand, if it's a genetic code we can sequence, then we absolutely can learn to understand it irrespective of its origin, and we can learn to combat it irrespective of its origin. And of course, the natural process of our bodies combating an unknown particle that we're naive to, that virus, wherever it came from, is precisely for the acquired immune system. So for our white cells, our T cells, our B cells, to develop the ability to combat it through the innate processes of our body. And a vaccine is simply a way of enhancing that process, of exposing our immune system to that pathogen before we have to encounter the illness itself. So to prepare our immune system to fight it. So whether it was natural or unnatural, as you call it, which really is just it's a kind of slightly artificial distinction. It's a real phenomenon. It's a real virus. Whether it was manufactured by a human or not, I don't think it was, but whether it was or not wouldn't affect our body's response to it, and wouldn't affect our ability to also devise vaccines for it. So, I understand your disquiet. I understand the disquiet this has caused. But it's not really a factor that would affect our ability to fight it. We just have to recognize what it is, recognize that it's a public health emergency, and develop strategies to cope with it. And within that, of course, some systems have done that much better. Some science proves to be more valuable than others. And those are ongoing issues which are of great relevance to humanity as we continue to face this, particularly as it's caused now, in just a year, 1.85 million deaths around the world.
Wow. What about vitamin D? Doctor, Ken in London wants to ask you about that. Let's squeeze him in. Ken.
Thanks very much, George. Look, from January, we were getting papers from the Chinese doctors that were dealing with the first round of this now mutated virus around the world. And they were saying that there were certain things that you could do. We had the discussion about vitamin D, and it does appear that vitamin D has a major role to play if you have sufficient amount within your body and your reservoir of vitamin D. Yet we have a government that is going through a process of saying they're going to provide vulnerable people with vitamin D, and about 2.5 million people are going to get it. But they're giving 400 units of vitamin D when all of the papers are saying that you need to have 4,000 a day or whatever. I understand that 400 units of vitamin D prevents rickets and goes back to the 50s, to papers from the 50s. But you also have a situation where ivermectin is being used around the world, and I'm not suggesting that we try it off the prescription, but somebody should be doing tests, double-blind tests, to see if this medication works. And it seems that the only ones that are getting through are the ones that cost $3,000 or £3,000, like remdesivir, which has no effect whatsoever on the outcome of the patients in terms of saving lives. A few days less in hospitals, but doesn't save people's lives. So why aren't we doing these tests? Why do we have a test by the Oxford group for hydroxychloroquine, where they gave 5 times the dose that's recommended, and then said, well, it's dangerous, it causes heart fluctuations? It's almost as if they're trying to prove that these systems don't work, rather than what will save perhaps millions of lives.
Okay, Ken. Doctor, sorry, it's a long one. Please go ahead.
It's a long one. I don't know how long I've got to answer the question, George, because there are several component parts. On vitamin D, so vitamin D is a vitamin made in your liver and your kidneys, but it needs to be activated by a process that it's a 1,7 disrotatory ring cycle closure. That means you need light in order to activate vitamin D. So it happens that in the northern hemisphere, when we have these long winters, a large part of the population are in fact vitamin D deficient. It's probably good for everyone in Britain to take a vitamin D supplement in general. Yes, you're right, that's related to bone metabolism and therefore therefore it's rickets, in the context of rickets that it was first studied, but it's since found and for long known to be related to the immune system, that our white cell counts don't function well without vitamin D. So people who have dark skin, people who are of Afro-Caribbean origin, people who are from South Asian origin in particular tend to have high rates of vitamin D deficiency, and it's very much in the interest of everyone of this subgroup to take vitamin D probably every winter to fight every infection, and that will affect their ability to fight off also coronavirus, not uniquely coronavirus. So it's a general problem. In terms of whether vitamin D has been found by itself to be therapeutic for coronavirus beyond that, the answer is that it hasn't in the trials that have been run so far. Then you really come on to another question. Ivermectin is an anti-parasitic drug. Again, like chloroquine, an anti-parasitic drug, there was some question as to whether these drugs would have efficacy. The trials that have been run so far haven't shown there to be truth in that. And I don't think it's right to impugn the whole of the medical profession, because, the medical profession is not just the drug companies, though. True, drugs are an important arsenal. We're all looking for medicines that are effective. The whole human population will recognize that there are drugs that are thousands of years old, whether they're aspirin or morphine, which are ubiquitously used. So none of us really underestimate the importance of medicine, its role it's had in our life when properly applied. But you're right, there is an undercurrent of what you said, which is correct, of course, which is that old medicines, which can be used relatively cheaply, don't make a huge amount of money for pharmaceutical companies. So research money can be disproportionately spent on less effective tools because more money can be made out of them. That is a problem of funding allocation. That is a problem of grant allocation. That is essentially a problem of capitalism. Nevertheless, above and beyond that, the drug industry is able to provide huge range of novel therapeutics which are rolled out onto the market each year and find their use. Some are more efficacious than others. It's up to the medical profession to scrutinize that thoroughly. Would the world be a better place if that was a more joined up process and we looked in a very, if profit essentially didn't tinge allocation of resources for research, if it didn't tinge a preventative versus a therapeutic approach to healthcare in general? Absolutely. And there's no profit to be made from a healthcare company from public health prevention measures. There's no profit for the private healthcare industry to be made from that. There's no huge amounts of grants to be given out from the government for that, and that has absolutely tinged our overall response and the world's overall response. But on the specific things you mentioned, that there is no therapeutic which is a panacea. Public health measures are the most effective measures we have in the world, universally applicable. They're not being uniformly applied, and that's why there's a huge difference between some countries, overwhelmingly the socialist countries, compared to the most free market fundamentalist countries who are suffering worse, United States and Britain, but also across Europe and across the Americas. In terms of the therapeutics, we will continue to look, but at the moment, there's no perfect answer. The best answers that we're developing are vaccines. There's a huge degree of skepticism precisely because of how much the issue of trials and supply is perverted by this profit motive, in which we've seen, the people who've developed their vaccine, the managers dumping their shares as they're going sky high. So all of this insider trading, all of this profiteering, makes people prejudiced against the actual healthcare products. Nevertheless, we have to find a way through it, and unquestionably, new medicines will be a part of it. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
A long way. Thank you, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. As always, thank you, Ken in London, for that question, which I think is a question that has echoed actually throughout most of this year that we have been discussing this matter. Thank you, Dr. Brar. 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
the mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, that was the week that was. Going back a bit, a few centuries, actually. It was on this day in 1496, don't you know? And how they scoffed at the time that Leonardo da Vinci unsuccessfully tested a flying machine. Again on this day in 1925, Benito Mussolini dissolved the Italian parliament and proclaimed himself the dictator of Italy, taking the title Il Duce, the leader. He was to end up upside down on a lamppost, quite deservedly. In 1977, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs incorporated Apple Computer Inc. More on that later. And on this day in 1977, former Home Secretary Roy Jenkins announced he was leaving Westminster politics to become Britain's first president of the European Commission, where he was on a salary of £600,000 back in 1977, plus healthy benefits. He returned to British politics in 1981 as a member of the so-called Gang of Four, who established the Social Democratic Party. He later became the Member of Parliament for Glasgow Hill Head, where he was, in 1987, dumped unceremoniously on the pavement outside the House of Lords, on his well-upholstered backside, by yours truly. It was the week in 1958 when Sir Edmund Hillary reached the South Pole, the first overland explorer to do so since Captain Robert F. Scott's doomed expedition in 1912. Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay were, of course, the first men to reach the 29,028 feet summit of Everest in 1953 as part of an expedition led by John Hunt. Hunt and Hillary were knighted on their return. No knighthood for Tenzing, however. In 1961, the longest recorded strike in history ended as the Danish Barbers' Assistants went back to work after a 33-year strike. The barbers must have been chin deep in hair. In 1986, this week, Phil Lynott, the former lead singer of the rock band Thin Lizzy, died from heart failure and pneumonia after an 11-day fight for his life. The 36-year-old rock star had been admitted to Salisbury Hospital in Wiltshire with a serious kidney and liver infection on Christmas Day after he collapsed from a drink and drug binge at his home in Surrey. A single spark can start a prairie fire, not a line from a Springsteen song, but a missive in 1930 from Mao Zedong. In 1981, a 35-year-old lorry driver from Bradford, suspected of carrying out 13 murders over West Yorkshire over the previous 5 years, appeared in court, accused of killing 20-year-old university student Jacqueline Hill, murdered in Leeds 7 weeks previously. He was, of course, Peter Sutcliffe, dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper, whose reign of terror lasted from 1976 to 1981. During that time, and aided by police incompetence, he killed 13 women in the north of England and tried to kill 7 more. Sutcliffe claimed he was driven to commit the murders by messages from God. And in 2001, an investigation into Britain's most prolific serial killer, former GP Harold Shipman, who was serving life imprisonment for the murder of 15 patients by lethal injection, revealed that he could have killed more than 300 of his patients. On the 13th of January 2004, Shipman died after he was found hanging in his cell at Wakefield Prison. The true extent of his crimes, while a trusted doctor in Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, may never be known. In this week, in 1681, the first recorded boxing match between the Duke of Albemarle's butler and his butcher took place. We don't know who won, but I'd reckon it was the man with the cleaver. In 1977, The music publisher EMI fired the Sex Pistols after reports of abusive behaviour at Heathrow Airport. Now, this is a particularly apposite one. In 2000 hospitals around the UK, it was the year. In the year 2000, around the UK, hospitals were buckling under the strain of a flu outbreak. The huge influx of patients, coupled with staff sickness, left many hospitals struggling not only to tend the living, but even to store the dead. At some hospitals, refrigerated lorries were used as temporary mortuaries as existing facilities were overwhelmed. The infamous identical twin brothers, Ronald and Reginald Cray, were remanded in custody in 1965, charged in connection with running a protection racket in London. The trial ended with the jury unable to reach agreement. A retrial ended in the brothers' acquittal. Less than a month after the trial ended, the Crays had taken control of a Soho club. They were arrested again in May 1968 to face a variety of charges, including murder. In March 1969, they were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. And the Third Cod War broke out in this week in 1976, when a British naval frigate was involved in a collision with an Icelandic gunboat in the Atlantic. Iceland was attempting to enforce a 200-mile exclusion zone for foreign trawlers instead of the 50 miles established in the Fishing Rights Agreement. Who knows? There may even be a fourth Cod War to come. And in this week, in 1999, US President Bill Clinton's impeachment trial began in the United States Senate after the House voted to impeach him for lying. A politician lying about his affair with Monica Lewinsky. Time prevents me telling you my Monica Lewinsky story. Maybe I've told you before anyway. The French people voted in 1962 to grant Algeria its independence in a referendum after 7 years of guerrilla war. Algeria was no longer Française. The result was a clear majority for self-determination, with 75% voting in favour. French officials estimate the 8 years of war leading to independence cost 350,000 lives. Algerian sources put the figure very much higher, at 1.5 million. And in 1966, in this week, France was mourning that cannot be correct. That number is completely wrong. And together with the missing commas means I've got to sack the writer of this material. So I'm going to leave that out because François Mitterrand wasn't elected President of France until the 1980s and therefore could not have died in this week in 1966. In 1979, the Khmer Rouge were on the retreat in Cambodia as hundreds of their troops fled the country after being crushed by Vietnamese-led rebel forces. The capital, Phnom Penh, was seized and the dictator, Pol Pot, and many of his soldiers forced to retreat into the countryside. Pol Pot was later convicted of treason and sentenced to life under house arrest. He died in April 1998. And it was in this week, in 1956, when Elvis's Don't Be Cruel and Hound Dog went to #1 and stayed there for 11 weeks. And in this week, Sir Anthony Eden resigned as Prime Minister of Britain due to ill health in 1957. He had been Prime Minister for just 1 year and 279 days. His controversial decision to invade Egypt in the Suez Crisis the year before, was the beginning of his demise as Prime Minister. In their first national strike for almost 50 years, Britain's coal miners walked out this week in 1972. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I went around switching lights on to help the miners. Almost 1.2 million workers were laid off as a result of the strike, and on the 19th of February, the strike was won, and the miners' leaders agreed a £95 million pay package. It was this strike which motivated a later Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, to pursue a vendetta against the miners and crush them in 1984-85 when they again went on strike. You'd be hard put to find a pit, try saying that, in Britain these days, although the effects of the year-long dispute are still being felt in mining villages today. And finally, in 2007, the Apple chief executive, Steve Jobs, unveiled the iPhone. And there's a good chance that you'll have one nearby you now. That's it, 7 tumultuous days in our past. Let's take a call. This first one from Aussie in London on Assange, who is an Aussie, if you get what I mean. Aussie, welcome.
Good evening, George. Long-time fan, first-time caller.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the topic of Julian Assange, I read his book. I believe his parents met at a Vietnam War protest.
Yeah.
And, you know, he acted in a heroic way that he felt would serve humanity, expose great crimes. And since Trump ran on an anti-war ticket, I think the least he could do is pardon Assange instead of the neocon criminals he's let off. For example, Scooter Libby, involved in the 9/11 conspiracy, Kushner's father from a criminal family that bought his way into Harvard and all sorts of dodgy real estate deals, and Roger Stone, who was involved in fixing the 2016 election for Israel. So instead of MAGA, make Israel great again, I think Trump could do something for the people that voted him in for once and stop serving the bourgeois empire known as the United States.
Okay, I think we've got your political leanings, Aussie. It's a pity that you introduced extraneous matter because it makes it more difficult for me. There's no doubt that Donald Trump could pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden in the next 3 weeks, just less than 3 weeks, I think, and he may well do so. I just say to President Trump, if he's watching, pardon me, if you want to know what really happened in your election, if you want to know if there was really voter fraud on the scale that you imagine, there's nobody better to find out the truth than Julian Assange. And on line 2, we have Siobhan, who is in Scotland, who is a nurse, wants to talk about COVID. Siobhan, go ahead.
Hi, George. Yeah, I'm in Scotland. I'm one of the NHS Pay 15 campaigners, but I've seen your poll about lockdown on Twitter.
Yeah.
Really, speaking to most nurses, doctors, NHS workers right now, there's very few who would tell you they don't agree with a lockdown. You have to understand that we don't have a date for our vaccines yet. Many of us haven't even had our first dose. The cases are increasing exponentially. Wards are turning red by the day and staffing levels are critical across the UK. It's really as felt by NHS workers that we need another lockdown until we can get this vaccination rolled out more widely.
I understand that entirely, of course, and sympathise with it. But as I said earlier, the over 50s in Scotland are not going to be vaccinated until June. What are the consequences of having a lockdown until June?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that people are thinking about the economy, and I think we'd be foolish not to acknowledge people's job losses and even the mental health impact that lockdowns have.
And the opportunity cost argument. There are a lot of people who can't get into hospital or won't go into hospital because of the coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, I understand. Absolutely understand what you're saying. And it doesn't just, you have to remember that as staff, the delays affect us as well. Many of us are waiting on specialist treatment that we can't access right now, or our children.
Good point.
But the thing that I would
you've
say,
not got any indication of when you're going to get your first dose?
Rumours right now are saying that it would likely be the first week in February, but communication isn't the forte of the NHS.
No, it's not. And that's only the first dose. You've got to wait how long to get the second?
Well, that's questionable because initially I think the guidelines were 21 days, but currently I think as Dr. Brar was saying, I think I'd seen him say something on Twitter about this actually because I do follow him, the dosage guidelines have obviously, the goalposts have been moved because now they're talking about distancing the second dose significantly.
Yeah.
And I've heard, different opinions on whether that is actually a good idea. I have heard academics coming out in favour, but likewise I've heard academics coming out against it. That is a little bit above my pay grade.
Well,
So
Dr. Tony Blair, the well-known physician and medical professional, he's gung-ho for that. He's advocating that. It's above my pay grade. If it's above yours, it's way above mine. Siobhan, thanks for that call. A useful antidote to those who continue to imply that hospitals are not overwhelmed. They're not over busy. It's all a hoax. That's Siobhan from the front line telling you the opposite. Please listen. Dale is in Surrey on the same subject. Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, hi, George. Thanks for having the show again.
Welcome.
Just wanted to ask you about the rising number of cases. We're up to over 50,000 now. And it appears that it's only the national lockdowns that appear to be working rather than the tiered system. I was just wondering what your thoughts are about maybe following a system similar to China's, where they've got it under control. I mean, I've got a friend who's from Wuhan, and she's explained to me that the lockdown was quite severe, but after 6-7 weeks of it, life has returned back to normal there.
Well, not only is it back to normal there, they had Christmas and New Year parties in Wuhan, in which hundreds of thousands of people were hugging each other and kissing each other. Happy New Year. How about that? That is a very good example of how draconian, you could say authoritarian, massive state mobilization over a very short period of time can actually free everyone to have a normal life while we are still in the pits here. That's my point, Dale. It's summed up by what Dr. Brar said earlier. I wouldn't have started from here. And luckily, all the tapes exist of what I said, what I stood for right at the beginning. I argued for a China-style approach to this, where nothing moves, nobody works, nobody leaves, nobody comes in. An absolute blanket approach, a real lockdown. We never had that. Even in the first lockdown, we never had that, Dale.
And I wanted to ask you about Korea as well, because in Korea, where I'm going to be working later this year, when you go to the actual airport, it takes about 24 hours, even if you're a resident, to be able to get into the country. But it seems that even in our biggest airports like London Heathrow, there doesn't seem to be any tests whatsoever. You can just walk straight into the country.
Well, there was 10 flights from abroad, and I mean really the far abroad, flew into Edinburgh Airport today, and the people walked off the planes and walked into the population, whilst nobody can move in Scotland, can do anything meaningful in Scotland, because everybody's under Tier 4, including where I live, which was in Tier 2, and overnight was moved up to Tier 4. This is the point I'm making. Our policy, north and south, has veered from the sublime to the ridiculous, back and forward, back and forward. And that's why we're now asking ourselves the question, Dale, is this going to make any difference? If you just lock down, for how long are you going to lock down? If you're waiting for the vaccines, the country will cease to exist. If we lock down between now and June, thousands of people would top themselves in their home, millions of people would go completely mad, and we wouldn't have an economy to sustain a national health service by the end of it. Do you feel me?
No, absolutely, I agree. But, I mean, would you think that one of the reasons why they've succeeded maybe in Asia is because they have a collectivist society rather than an individualist society?
Yes, and even in South Korea, which is a capitalist economy. South Korea is almost par exemplar, a capitalist society, but they have a society. They have a country, they have a nation, they have national consciousness. And they seem to have faith in their leaders. And so when their leaders act competently, as they did do, take my hat off to them, it actually performed, South Korea, as good as almost any country in the world. And look at the state we're in. Look at the state the United States is in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I moved to Korea to work as a teacher and live there, you're more than welcome to come and visit us.
Well, I'd very much like to do that. My wife and children have been there in the south. I've been in the north a couple of times, but not in the south. But as a lover of Korean food, I'll take you up on that, Dale. Good luck. Bon chance. Bon voyage. Let me plug the numbers again. 02077 982 255 is the UK number. The US number is 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet me at George Galloway at RTUK News, preferably both of us. Coming up after the news, it's the Right Honourable Norman Baker on Brexit. Don't go away anywhere soon.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
COVID restrictions in England are probably about to get tougher to curb rising infections, the Prime Minister has warned. Boris Johnson said harsher measures may be required in parts of the country in the coming weeks. Tougher restrictions in Scotland, including a total lockdown, may be announced tomorrow. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has recalled Parliament and is expected to announce the new measures. The Prime Minister said the new measures in England included the possibility of keeping schools closed, although he said this is not something that the government wants to do. He urged parents to send their children to primary school tomorrow, saying that there was no doubt in his mind that the schools are safe. But the Prime Minister indicated tougher measures could be on the way, adding that the government had to be realistic about the spread of the new variant of the virus. He said increasing vaccination would provide a way out of restrictions and that he hoped tens of millions would be vaccinated in the next 3 months. Johnson also said that he stuck by his previous prediction that the situation would be better by the spring. He said he expects tens of millions of COVID-19 vaccinations will be given out in the next 3 months. People across the UK will start to receive the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine from tomorrow, when 530,000 doses will be ready at GPs and hospitals. But questions remain over the policy shift on whether the second dose of the Oxford and Pfizer jabs is given. More than 40 MPs have written to number 10 Downing Street seeking clarity on the changes. Asked if it was correct that 2 million people a week would need to be vaccinated to end restrictions, Boris Johnson said that he hopes that it would be possible to do tens of millions in the course of the next 3 months. He said that the UK had been the first country to have pioneered a room temperature vaccine in the Oxford jab, which he said offered real hope for the future. Liverpool's leaders have called on the government to impose a new nationwide lockdown to halt the spread of the new variant of COVID-19. Acting Mayor Wendy Simon and the City Council's cabinet said that urgent action is needed because the rise of coronavirus had reached alarming levels. They said it was self-evident the tier system had not curbed the variant. It had been concentrated in London and South East England, but is believed to be spreading in the north. Cases in Liverpool have almost trebled in the past 2 weeks. US Vice President Mike Pence has welcomed an effort by a group of senators to refuse to certify Joe Biden's presidential election win. The 11 Republican senators and senators-elect, led by Ted Cruz of Texas, want a 10-day delay to audit unsubstantiated allegations of election fraud. The move is certain to fail, as most senators are expected to endorse Biden's win in Wednesday's vote. Biden, a Democrat, is due to be inaugurated as president on the 20th of January. But President Donald Trump has refused to concede the November 3rd election, repeatedly alleging voter fraud without providing any evidence. Pence has stopped short of echoing allegations of election fraud, but on Saturday, his chief of staff, Mark Short, said Pence shared what he called the concerns of millions of Americans about voter fraud and irregularities. 87-year-old veteran broadcaster Larry King has tested positive for coronavirus and is being treated at a hospital in Los Angeles, according to US media. Sources close to his family told ABC News and his former employer CNN that he has been at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center for over a week. 5 bodies have been found in the search for the missing following a massive landslide that destroyed homes in Norway, police have said. 4 bodies were discovered on Friday and Saturday and another one on Sunday morning. The first victim to be found was named as 31-year-old Eric Granol. 5 people remain missing following the hillside collapse that sent mud into the village of Ask on Wednesday. Rescuers continue their search for survivors. 2 men base jumped from the rooftop bar of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Nashville on Friday, causing a mass panic among the bar's patrons, police said. Hotel security told police that 2 men approached the ledge of the rooftop bar on the hotel's 25th floor on Friday evening and jumped off. When the men jumped, patrons at the bar started screaming and there was a mass panic, according to the police report. Witnesses looked over the ledge of the building and saw the 2 men parachuting across the road to an adjacent parking lot. Once they landed, they got into a parked car and drove off. Many parts of England have now seen snow flurries accompanying the arrival of the new year. Areas which welcomed 2021 with several centimetres of snow included Northumberland, parts of Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. The Met Office has warned worse is to come, with more wintry showers forecast. Driving conditions on many roads will become hazardous as the cold weather continues next week. Several football matches were cancelled this weekend due to frozen pitches. Large parts of Scotland have also experienced snowfalls and icy conditions, including the largest city, Glasgow. And finally, a family of 5 made a narrow escape when a small plane crashed into their house in Lyon Township, about 40 miles west of Detroit in the USA. 3 people in the plane died, the pilot and 2 passengers. The family of 5 living in the home made it out alive, but their house was engulfed in flames. The mother said that the family was inside when the plane crashed. She said that they were in the living room arguing over which movie to watch and had just moved into a different room when the plane struck the house, burying into the living room that they had just left. Had the mother, the father and 3 children stayed in the room, it would have been a very different story. Sadly, the family's cat wasn't so lucky. And that's the latest on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, the result of the first poll: should Boris Johnson announce a total lockdown this week? Yes, 47%. No, 53%. And a big number of votes, 2,801. Here's the second poll. Who will be the US president this time next year? You may have heard me ask Caleb Maupin. He didn't really have an answer. A, Joe Biden. B, Donald Trump. C, Kamala Harris. Let's have it. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, we Brexited. The sky hasn't fallen in. There's no shortage of sperm. The aeroplanes are not falling from the skies. The trucks are not queued at the channel ports. And despite the fact that people here and everywhere said over and over again that Boris Johnson was determined upon a hedge fund no-deal Brexit, he went and got a deal. And that deal is supported by the European Union governments and by the government of Britain, followed by a vote in Parliament overwhelmingly supporting it also. But it was opposed by some erstwhile Trotskyites, liberals, and nationalists, a motley collection of individuals, I must say. Thankfully, neither I nor the Right Honourable Norman Baker, my former parliamentary colleague, were there, because we've got better jobs now on the radio and on the television. And he's just fresh from his weekly radio show and joins me now. The Right Honourable Norman Baker. Ah, how wonderful to see you. I normally just hear you. You're still doing your radio. You can tell us about that later. I'm a listener because I like the genre, the era of music that you deal with. But if we'd been together in the House of Commons this past week, how would you have voted, Norman?
Well, I would have voted against the deal, but on the basis that I don't think the deal was very good. You would have voted for it, presumably, George, so we'd be on different sides on this particular matter.
As almost always.
The situation is that we've got a deal. It's a pretty thin deal. It protects goods being shipped, which is to the benefit of the EU. What it doesn't do is protect services, which are 80% of our exports, in effect, because the EU wants to squeeze us out, squeeze the City of London out. So it suits the EU very well. It won't suit Britain very well. I'm afraid that's where we're going to be. It will transpire that way, I think, as months unfold. You mentioned at the top there were no queues at Dover. Well, there may not be no queues at Dover because what happened was everybody got their trucks in early before the 31st of December deadline, and we've had a public holiday since then. Let's see how things are in a couple of weeks.
So you would have effectively, therefore, voted for no deal in which there would have been aeroplanes flying out the sky, because the motion on the order paper was for the deal. If that motion fell in the time available, we would have left without a deal. What kind of Remainer policy is that?
Well, as Theresa May said, if the Labour Party supported her deal, it would have been a rather better deal than the one that we finally ended up with. But look, I mean, the situation was that we had this rushed negotiation. Parliament kept out of the whole business, George, as you'll appreciate. It had no proper role in this situation. There was a 4 or 5 hour debate at 1 minute to midnight. I mean, it was a hopeless situation. But in the end, you have to look at it and say, is this deal in Britain's interest? And I personally don't believe it is. And I think the Labour Party in particular has made an historic mistake in what they've done, because this is their Iraq war. This is the decision they've taken, which will now be hung around their necks. And if it all goes pear-shaped, which I think it might do in the years ahead, Labour will have voted for it.
Now, you say that it may well go pear-shaped. It may well not, of course. The country voted for it and therefore must have it. Aren't you in danger of being, I don't know if you're still in the Liberal Democrats, but aren't people like you and them not in danger of being seen as churlishly wishing the country to fail, wishing for the very outcome that you had predicted? And the logic of that is to offer the voters that we should rejoin the EU. Do you think the Liberal Democrats would prosper as the party offering to rejoin the EU?
Well, look, George, I mean, I'm not speaking for the Lib Dems, although I am still a member. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is you have to, in politics, as you've done very well yourself, many times, stand up for what you think is right, whether it's popular or not. The Lib Dems champion the rights of Hong Kong refugees. Paddy Ashton did that when it was unpopular. We stood against the Iraq war when the same sort of majority almost in Parliament, as we've seen this week, voted for the Iraq war. We didn't, and I didn't. So you have to do what you think is right in politics. And if the public's with you, great. If not, then at least your conscience is clear.
Well, that's a good point. But what about my point about manifesto promise to rejoin? It's quite likely, in my view, that notwithstanding what you've said, the Liberal Democrats will not go into the next election promising to rejoin. Neither will Labour, however remain supportive they were in the last general election. So actually, they're not following the logic of their position of conscience. Otherwise, they'd now say, vote for us, we'll apply to rejoin.
Well, look, I mean, there's 4 years away to the election, George. Labour certainly won't vote to rejoin. That's very clear from what Keir Starmer says. He will try and fill at the edges, get a bit more with European arrest warrant or one or two things like that, but he'll stay essentially with the Tory deal. What the Lib Dems do, I have no idea. What I do know is this, that the people who are mourning Britain leaving are the Western democracies, not just the European Union, but Australia, Canada, our friends around the world. The people who are celebrating are the autocrats in Russia, in China, and of course, Donald Trump, who was still there. You know, I know where my friends are. They're on the side of democracies, not the side of autocracies. If you look at the power in the world, George, as you know very well, there's power with unelected people, with currency speculators, with multinational companies. And they love the idea that Britain is now weaker outside the European Union, and the European Union is weaker without Britain. They're celebrating. The people who believe in democracy, by and large, aren't.
I didn't catch any of that mourning in Australia and Canada. And I'm bound to tell you, I don't expect that China and Russia gave a moment's thought to Britain leaving the European Union. This is, peculiarly from you, a piece of British national braggadocio. In Moscow and Beijing, I promise you they are thinking and talking of quite other things.
Well, we do know that Russia was interfering in the Brexit campaign, George, in 4 years ago. We do know that. So
I didn't know that. Do tell.
Well, we have. And we also know that Russia has had a long-term ambition of weakening the European Union and weakening NATO. I don't blame them for that. It's their national interest to do that. But that's their policy. That's what they're pursuing. And they'll be happy with the situation which has arisen now. As for Australia, one of the Australian papers the other day suggested that they describe Britain now as a much-loved grandfather who's lost it.
Well, so that's what they're saying about us down under. I could choose some India, choice epithets to hurl back at them. But actually, isn't it the case that countries like Australia will benefit from Brexit Britain? After all, why was it the case that someone from Australia had to climb through many hoops to come to Britain and live and work, but somebody from eastern Bulgaria could walk in with their whole family, their whole village, and set up shop here? I would have thought Australia was looking forward to this new era.
Well, a couple of things about that, George. First of all, in my view, we shouldn't have expanded the EU beyond the 15 countries. It was a Western European Union that made sense. It didn't make sense, in my view, to bring in the ex-Warsaw Pact countries. Secondly, we could have allowed the Australians in within the EU. There was nothing to stop us and let the Australians coming in as we wanted to. If we had the intention to do so, we could have done that. And as far as Australia's position now is concerned, look, Australia's reconfigured itself since the 1973 joining of the EU by Britain. It looks to China, it looks to Japan, it looks to Asian countries. Britain is not very relevant now to Australia, to be honest with you.
And yet they're mourning the fact that 17.4 million of us. No, really. I mean, shouldn't we put this whole thing behind us? Shouldn't you and I be talking about the future rather than the past?
Well, we are talking about the future in a sense, George. I mean, this will not go away. The consequences of Brexit, whether they're good or bad, you might have a different view from me on that, are going to be with us. And you know, we're not going to have I'm not going to lead a campaign to rejoin the EU because the decision's been taken. But the consequences of that decision, which I think is a generational historical error, will become apparent in the years ahead. So we'll see what happens. I mean, if we end up as Singapore on sea, which is what some of the right-wing Tories want, that'll be very detrimental to ordinary working people.
I think they're doing quite well in Singapore, aren't they?
They are. They are doing very well if you've got money. And if you don't mind the environmental standards, you don't mind the labour regulations, they are doing quite well, yes.
Singapore's the cleanest place on the planet.
Yes. And you know why that is? Because people who even drop a amount of chewing gum are locked up as soon as you can say boo.
Well, look, in Singapore, their education system, their health system, the cleanliness of their environment is absolutely impeccable. You made the wrong allusion there. You should have picked somewhere else. Now tell me, Norman, because I'm a listener, but not everyone that's watching or listening tonight is. How do we find you on the radio?
Well, yeah, you find me on Sea Haven FM, which is 96.3, but if you're in the area. But online, just go to seahavenfm.com. There you can listen online live, or you can find the menu that says listen again and listen to any program that's been broadcast in the last month. If you listen to my blues program, which has been on the air between 8 and 9, you'll find me featuring bands like 10 Years After, Jethro Tull, I think I've also featured Robert Johnson this week. I can't remember now. But
Robert Johnson, now you're talking. I am a listener. I encourage everyone else to be so. The Right Honourable Norman Baker, Happy New Year to you. All the best. I look forward to jousting with you again sometime soon on perhaps a more relevant matter. Let's take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Time, weather, and
let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
So who will the US president be this time next year? A, Joe Biden, 33%. B, Donald Trump, 27%. C, Kamala Harris, 40%. I've warned you, Joe, don't let her push your bath chair. 656 people have voted. You can vote too on my Twitter feed. Let's go to the first call from Terry in Rainford. Go ahead, Terry.
Hi, George. We have met before.
Okay.
I was at Chester when you give a really good speech there in the theatre.
Yeah, I remember that. My goodness. I love Chester, actually.
Yeah.
I love the zoo. I take my kids to the zoo. Two of my kids live quite nearby.
Chester's a great place, but I brought up the point of when you went to Washington to the Senate.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And the whole theatre was in uproar in your support because
it was that was
the most.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why I remember it, Terry, because I didn't expect that in Chester. I had a preconception.
It's a Tory place.
Yeah. I had a preconception about Chester that turned out to be entirely wrong. It was a good lesson for me, actually.
Yeah, no, that's right. I remember that night, and I remember bringing up the point of he was asking for questions to the audience, and I brought up a question about Washington and when you went to the Senate. And that was the most magnificent performance I've ever seen, George. That was absolutely superb.
Thank you, Terry.
It was really.
It was my best day so far.
Oh no, that I don't think anybody could beat that.
Thanks,
Nobody could beat that.
Thank you.
But before I get on to the point, I just wanted to say I hope your mother gets the vaccine and the care that she needs.
I mean, she's 85, and I thought that was bad enough that she hasn't had a cheap about when she's going to get the vaccine, but turns out there's people in their 90s haven't heard a cheap either.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, who's getting it? Who's getting it, Terry, if people in their 90s have not got it yet?
It's appalling, but I will get on to that now if you'll allow me to.
Yeah.
But, what I was going to say was that if you remember back in 2017 and we was voting about whether we was going to leave the EU, Boris had a big red bus, and it said on the side, £350 million per week to the EU. Why can't we spend it on the NHS?
Yeah.
Now, I've worked out that at £500 per week for a nurse, we could have 700,000 nurses. Now, going back, when you say that we go back to 2017, there's been an enormous amount of time to get all these nurses in place. I know we've only just left the EU, but it was that we had plenty of warning of it, and we've got these Nightingale hospitals now.
We've not got any staff to put in them.
No, well, that's right. That's the reason why they haven't got any staff to put in this. And if you remember all the hoo-ha that went on. We had Prince Charles giving a video call to the Excel Centre, and we had Matt Hancock and all the others saying how wonderful it was that we got this up and running in such a short time. No staff.
It's one of the great mysteries of this epoch, as so much of what's happened in the last year remains for now a mystery, but it will not always be a mystery, Terry. From my point of view, I want to see people on trial. I want to see them in court for grotesque, criminal, corporate manslaughter negligence in both Edinburgh and in London, the prima facie evidence for which is staring us in the face, even if we don't yet know the whole story. Terry, a wonderful call. Many thanks for it. I've got to go to Stuttgart in Germany, where Corina is on the line. Go ahead, Corina.
Yeah, hello, George. Thank you. I'd like to ask you about Julian Assange and what you think his chances are tomorrow when the judge gives a verdict. And, I read an article from Consortium News yesterday where it was said there might be a so-called split decision. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, because I adumbrated them just half an hour ago. It is, in fact, possible. Perhaps it might be described as a judgment of Solomon, that the extradition will be refused on the most serious charges, national security charges, the ones that carry a potential sentence of 170 years, whilst extradition is granted on the far less serious charge of facilitating someone to get round a password and into a computer. That someone being Chelsea Manning, who very bravely blew the whistle on the war crimes of the US empire and did so through the good offices of WikiLeaks. Now, that charge has a maximum penalty of 5 years. You could argue that Julian has already served that 5 years. So that is, if you like, a third option. The judge tomorrow could turn down the whole extradition application. She could agree the whole extradition application, or she could do as I have just suggested there. Last word to you, Corina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm actually quite worried about that, because wouldn't that make an extradition even more likely, because the British authorities might be more willing to agree to extradite Assange if the US says they only charge him on one.
That is, of course, one way of looking at that. It would be to say that the glass was half empty. I would say that if Julian is extradited on the minor charge, that would be appealable, because the United States could not be relied upon only to charge Julian with the minor offence of computer tampering. After all, this was a government that openly discussed killing him. This is a government that sought and failed to extradite him on national security charges that would have led to 170 years of bird. So my argument would be, and I think it would be a compelling one, that the British could not extradite Julian in those hypothetical circumstances unless they received a copper-bottomed cast iron guarantee from the US justice system that the matter on which he was being extradited would be the only matter on which he could be tried. And whilst that was being thrashed out, bail would be inescapable. No court could keep you in Belmarsh if they were only offering to extradite you on a minor computer charge. So bail would be granted, and I think the whole dynamic would move decisively in our favor. Corina, thanks for the call from Germany. Jim is in the United States, in Fort Collins. Let's go there. Jim, welcome.
Hi, George.
Nice to hear from you. Where's Fort Collins?
It's about 55 miles north of Denver on Interstate 25.
Very lovely. I love Colorado. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I called during your interview with Caleb.
Yes.
And he brought up Jimmy Dore and his fight for Medicare for all.
Yes.
Well, he's been fighting for that for a long time. He's gone bankrupt because he had some terrible bone disease. Him and his wife went bankrupt.
Yeah.
But what the real big poop storm is right now is he's trying to get 3 or 4 of these liberal progressives to withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
For Speaker of the House. She has to run again. It's a new Congress going to start tomorrow, first business day after the first. And they want these people to withhold their vote if she will promise, and they'll vote for her if she promises to have a roll call vote on Medicare for all. All he wants is a vote. He knows it's not going to pass right now.
But what's
all
wrong?
he wants is
I'm at a loss as to why anyone would be against that. Never mind somebody that regarded themselves as a radical.
Yeah, exactly. And they can't even get a roll call vote. You know, with the vote, they'd see who really is for it or against it. And then, you know, these people would have to take a position, and then they could see, okay, which districts do we have to flip or anything like that. So, you know, I'm feeling that the Democrats they're just going to, you know, that expression, kick the can down the road. They're just going to push it back. It's been pushed back since the FDR administration.
Exactly.
And
well, I'm 100% behind Jimmy Dore. I think he's a wonderful person, and he is, as you say, poop storm. He's in the eye of a tornado over the simple demand that you withhold your vote from someone like Nancy Pelosi, who shouldn't be in that position anyway. You withhold your vote from her until she promises to put Medicare for all in front of the House for a vote. It's almost inexplicable, Jim.
That's right. It is inexplicable, other than they really don't want to do it.
That's exactly
and they're taking the money. They're taking the money from
Jimmy has embarrassed them because for all their faux leftist talk, they're all careerist backsliders underneath.
Oh, yeah.
Jim.
It's just Jimmy and his friends. Yeah, do you know who Graham Elwood is? He's another one of these L.A. comedians.
No.
He has a show like that. He's very good. He's keeping the Ghislaine Epstein story alive.
Okay.
He was molested as a child. And so this is in
well, more power to his elbow. Jim, thanks for that call from Colorado. John is in Thirsk on the COVID. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I agree with you that we shouldn't be starting from here.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of people who are behaving incredibly badly. You just have to look at those people who went to Switzerland in the middle of a bloody pandemic, who went to the ski slopes, and when they found that they couldn't go skiing, when the Swiss government told them to be in quarantine, they fled.
Yeah.
They hired taxis, they hired cars, you know, it's just unbelievable kind of people are these who have a sense of entitlement where everybody else is supposed to behave in a kind of decent, mutual aid kind of thing.
Well, of course, if we had a proper society, John, we wouldn't need to be told to wash our hands, keep our distance, and be aware of our surroundings in the midst of something that is passing from person to person. I mean, I saw someone on Twitter today actually proposing, giving a date where everybody should meet at such and such a place, and everyone should hug every stranger that turns up. Now, this is a kind of madness. I wouldn't do that if there wasn't a virus. Now that I know there's a virus going around, hugging strangers is the very last thing I'm going to do.
It's like a through-a-looking-glass world. I mean, I constantly wake up and think I'm in a looking-glass world where people are just behaving in a kind of abominable way.
No, I agree with you. I agree.
But underlying it is a government that has always been behind the curve. You know, why didn't they do the lockdown when they knew that the virus was in Italy? Why didn't they kind of stop people travelling at that point?
We had a whole month of advance notice, not just from China, but as you say, from Italy, our European neighbour. We continued to allow flights in, hundreds, thousands of flights in, from every afflicted area in the world, including Wuhan, including Italy. And the people got off the planes and walked. We could have used the fact that we were an island, and therefore our frontiers are, in theory, easier to seal, and we could have gone into the world's best lockdown for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, and we'd have been partying like they are in Wuhan now.
I mean, we are a major hub, unlike, say, New Zealand. But, you know, we could have done this. I absolutely agree with you, George. We could have done this. And that would have saved so many more lives, and it would have actually saved the economy to boot.
Saved the lives and saved the economy, which, if we can't rescue, will itself cost lives.
Absolutely.
You won't have an NHS if you don't have an economy.
Yeah. And this is where they're playing catch-up now. I can understand that Boris wants to try to save the economy. But it's too late because he didn't take the action when it was required.
Great call, John. Thanks for that. Jeannie, is in London on Assange. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
Thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. All over the world they're listening.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm following on from what Corinna from Stuttgart said about the trial, and which is tomorrow, obviously, at the Old Bailey.
Yes.
And we don't know what the judge will hand down as her decision, but I suspect it won't be a sympathetic one.
As I put it to Roger Waters, if she turns down the US, then for the last 6 months or more, she's been giving an acting performance worthy of an Oscar.
Exactly. I watched her in court for a couple of days, and she's frightening. My question is partly to do with how we go forward. I mean, how do we, you were talking about bail, but they have the British justice system has been compliant towards what it's been asked to do by the U.S.
Yeah.
So I foresee a possibility that Julian Assange would be in Belmarsh prison throughout the whole of a very lengthy appeal process, which could go on for years.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you think we could do to put, to put pressure on that. And the other thing, I guess, I wondered, it's great that you're talking about this. However, I was out today talking to people on the streets, many of whom are supportive, but very few of whom knew very much about what was going on. And the media, of course, here, the mainstream media, has been shameful in its silence. So my two questions. One is, how do we get Julian out of Belmarsh? And what do we do about this appalling, disgraceful silence in the media here?
Well, I think it all comes down to that last point that you make. There is zero activity in Parliament about this. Throughout almost all of this period, a state of complete cowardice existed across the political class, even on the left of the political class. Then there was a brief moment when the likes of John McDonnell was suddenly demanding the release of Julian Assange. It was, well, we've got to be grateful for small mercies and better late than never and so on. But since which, again, a period of total silence. How come in the whole of the British Parliament, 650 members of Parliament, we cannot get... You can get a campaign running in Parliament about cats stuck up trees. Believe me. You can get people to sign early day motions to control the number of pigeons in Trafalgar Square. It's easy. But nothing on Julian because of cowardice. How do we stiffen the resolve of the political class? Only if they feel public pressure. How do you get public pressure? By coverage, by a narrative developing, by knowledge spreading, by a sense of awareness and consciousness developing amongst the people in the country, so that politicians are bumping into people all the time and someone's asking them, what about Julian Assange? Only then will you get action amongst the political class. And I've done my best, you've done your best. I don't know what more I can do, but I'll keep on doing what I have been doing. But let's hope, Jeannie, on this night, above all, that tomorrow this fight can come to an end. And Julian, this time tomorrow night, can be hugging his children, hugging his partner. Thanks very much for that call. Alan is in Sutherland. Go ahead, Alan.
No, I'm Alan Sutherland. I'm in Stonehaven, George.
Alan Sutherland in Stonehaven. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. I'm just thinking Brexit's been done now. Boris Johnson's got a huge majority in Parliament. 1 million people in Scotland voted for Brexit. And yet he's still the bogeyman that Nicola Sturgeon threatens us all with for Scottish independence as to a big reason why we should be out of the UK. I'm just wondering what you think Boris Johnson can do to get himself and his government and the UK more popular in Scotland.
If he were to call me, I'd have a full prospectus for him.
Right.
But just before I give some of it, it is true that Boris Johnson personifies a type of Tory which is easy to lampoon, easy to caricature, doesn't play all that well. I think probably in Stonehaven, certainly not in Stirling, and not in the big cities across the industrial belt in Scotland. It's easy to lampoon Boris Johnson, but even if he wasn't there, even if the leader of the Conservatives was Theresa May, even if the leader of the Conservatives was Kenneth Clarke, the cry would still be, Tories, Tories. They have so discovered in the SNP that you can make Tory a synonym for Westminster, and you can make Westminster a synonym for the English. Because that's really what the SNP are about. They wouldn't care if the Tories were led by St. Francis of Assisi. They wouldn't care if Labour was led, and it was led, by Jeremy Corbyn, who supported many of the policies they claim also to support. It didn't make them any less determined to break this country up along the middle, to sever it one from another, to make Jerry Marsden, God rest his soul, a foreigner in Liverpool. It wouldn't actually matter, is what I'm saying. who the leaders of the parties at Westminster were. But Britain needs to be made more popular. I hate Boris Johnson. I despise Boris Johnson. I've spent my whole life fighting against the Tories, but I don't hate Britain. The Tories are for Christmas. Separation is for life, forever, can never be undone. So the values, the history, the common culture, the common economic interest shared in this small island is what has to be popularized. And we could start by not allowing taxpayers' money to be sent to London, from London to Edinburgh, and hoarded in Edinburgh for some future purpose, nefarious or otherwise. We could start by insisting that money destined for small business in Scotland as relief from the coronavirus is given directly to the business. And if the Scottish administration won't do it, the Treasury in London should do it directly. We should stop allowing Nicola Sturgeon to pretend that she's done better on the coronavirus than the English, when as a matter of fact, she's done worse. Where is the public relations department in all of this? Let's go over the heads of those that wish to split up the country and show the people in Scotland just how much they benefit from being a part of Britain. And they do benefit massively, more than any other part of Britain. I have represented people in West Yorkshire. I've represented people in the East End of London. Trust me, I know that Scotland gets the best deal in the whole country from the Barnett formula and from the UK taxpayer. And there's good reason for it. I support it. I'm not arguing against it. But let's make sure the people in Scotland know about it. Last word to you, Alan.
Well, I was going to say, George, I think hopefully they've started that. I don't know if you've read that they're talking about giving £100 million to regenerate the fishing industry in Scotland directly to the fishermen. They're going to bypass Holyrood.
Excellent.
And I think if they did more than that, maybe you had a convoy of trucks delivering the vaccines to Scotland, saying a present from the UK to Scotland or something like that, publicise the fact that these drugs are coming from elsewhere into Scotland. I think you're right. I think they should be doing more of that, and then saying why they're doing it.
And they're coming. Where's the vaccine coming from? It's coming from Oxford University, that they want to make a foreign country. They want to make Oxford University a foreign university.
Yeah.
We have to highlight the ludicrousness of all of this. They want to go into the EU while the rest of the UK has left it, necessitating the hardest of borders between Scotland and England, when Scotland sells 65% of its trade to England and Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom. We need to get busy on this, Alan. Now, I've seen your stuff. You're good. And I'm not bad at it either. But it's time that the government, along in Whitehall, got off their backsides and got busy. Thanks for the call. Sadia is in London on Assange. Go ahead, Sadia.
Hello there, George. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. You made a... Did you call me last week?
Yeah.
You nearly made me cry.
Oh, it's just such a heart-wrenching topic when you think of the severity and the gravity of the decision tomorrow.
Yeah.
So my question, probably touching on, again, what Karina and I think Jeannie also said earlier today. Again, D-Day's tomorrow, so I'm preparing to be at the front line tomorrow outside the Old Bailey, 9 o'clock. Yeah.
Good for you. Keep socially distanced, wear a mask.
Of course. We do keep our distance and wear our masks. We just want to support Julian in a safe way.
Yeah.
But the day D-Day is tomorrow.
Yeah.
And last week you told me that you're reading the runes and they looked hopeful. So I was wondering, what do you think the chances are of Julian actually walking out the front door of the Old Bailey, tomorrow? And if the pardon has not been given by the pardon's not been given by the US as yet, unless they're keeping us again hanging. But if, he doesn't get the pardon that we're hoping for and the verdict doesn't go the way I'm hoping for, what do you think the likelihood of him actually getting bail? Because we can't have Assange in such atrocious conditions in Belmarsh with no winter clothing, etc. So I was hoping your rune reading would come into effect right now, and you could give me some more
I
hope.
can't. I'm good at prediction, but I can't predict what's in the head of Judge Barrister. I can only say that her performance throughout, the vindictiveness with which she conducted the case, vindictive against Julian, vindictive against his lawyers, vindictive against members of the public that were seeking to report on the events in her courtroom and so on, would overwhelmingly seem to point in the direction of a bad judgment tomorrow. But we shouldn't be, we'll be saddened, of course, if that happens, but we shouldn't be demobilized or demotivated by that, because that's not the beginning of the end, that's only the end of the beginning. This trial will run and run. If we lose tomorrow, it will be appealed, and that appeal will be to a higher level of the British judiciary, and that could only be a good thing, I think, considering her performance in the lower court so far. Then the issue of bail would become paramount. You cannot really justify keeping someone in Belmarsh year after year after year on an extradition case. That's something you would do to a terrorist prisoner who was at grave risk of blowing you up if he was allowed to put a tag on and go home and be under house arrest with his wife and children. That would sharpen up that demand. If you push me, I'll say this. It's more likely that Donald Trump will pardon Julian Assange than that Judge Barrister will find in our favour tomorrow. But I don't rule it out. It could be that she is an Oscar-winning actress. It could be that all of the foregoing was merely a dance of the seven veils. Thanks for that, Sadia. Liam is in Belfast. Go ahead, Liam.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call. Great show as always tonight, mate.
Thank you.
My main point is about the COVID situation. Just very quickly, I think unfortunately for Julian, he's created too many enemies in the deep states of both countries, but you never know what Donald Trump's going to do these days, so I do hope that he will get pardoned for obvious reasons.
He's unpredictable. He's the only one that's unpredictable. The rest are all too predictable.
Too many deep state elitists in both nations want to see him go down. But just on COVID, I haven't cut the whole show tonight, George, with regards to Dr. Brar, who I think is brilliant. I think he should be the head of the COVID task force.
We should put him in charge of the vaccine rollout. I was just thinking that when he was talking.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He really is.
He could be the Beaverbrook equivalent. Beaverbrook put war production up hundreds of % just by moving mountains and kicking ass. And that's what we need here.
He's tremendous, he is. Just on the lockdown situation itself, there has to be a full lockdown, I think. But the problem is you got things happening all over the country. You got all these Love Island celebrities going to Dubai and Mexico to party. You got football games happening all over the country. If we're going to have a full lockdown, everything's got to stop. All travel's got to stop. Nobody jet set not to Dubai, no football games, no sporting events, no Graham Norton having audiences and guests in his studios. Everything's got to be done by Zoom link again. But that's not going to happen, I don't think. I think everything, it's one rule for us and one rule for the elites, the celebrities. They get away with these things and have their parties and all the get-togethers. We don't. And that's what really peeves me off, and I think a lot of people as well.
I think that's a very important and powerful point. Well made, Liam. Unfortunately, it will have fallen on deaf ears along the road from me here in Whitehall. As I said earlier, and being half an Irishman, I'm entitled to say, as the apocryphal Irishman said when asked the way to Dublin, oh, I wouldn't have started from here. Thanks for that, Liam. Lee in Sheffield, probably the last call, maybe. We'll get one more in. Lee in Sheffield. Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, George. Brilliant show tonight, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for Julian Assange tomorrow.
Thank you.
I really am.
Thank you.
But I want to talk about Brexit because there's one or two things that's come into my mind of late. How can we take people along with Brexit? It's happened, and that's the end of it. It has happened. And I see this disconnecting people, that you've got this liberal class who, and everybody else, the former hasn't an idea about ordinary people. In fact, the number of people I know who voted Remain, I can probably count on one hand. And then you've got people, left of centre people, who are, for my mind, I cannot explain how much they wedded to the EU. I mean, if I can just...
And it's a new thing. It's a new thing,
yeah,
Lee.
I was just going to say one thing to you, George. You know, when I was about 10 or 11, I read Tony Benn, Arguments for Socialism, right? And there's a chapter in there about the EU, and there's nothing to my mind has changed my mind since than what was wrote in that chapter in a book that wrote in 1980-odd.
Best call of the night, Lee. Unfortunately, the hour is against us. Best call of the night. Make sure you call back again and tell some home truths like that. But the last call goes to the legend, Norma in Bristol. Norma, did you get any update on your jab?
Yes. It's good news, really.
Uh-huh.
I had a text to confirm that the second vaccine will be on Saturday morning. Now, mine is not delayed. It's the Pfizer one. And some people have got to wait 12 weeks, they say.
Yeah.
But I was very pleased that actually, against what some people have been saying, mine is coming up as a genuine 3 weeks.
It's very odd, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're in Bristol, you're in Bristol.
Yeah.
You're in the NHS in Bristol.
Yep.
Some people haven't had one.
My husband hasn't. He hasn't
Your
had
husband
one.
hasn't. You will
No.
shortly have had two. They're saying, and led by Tony Blair, a campaign to lengthen the time between the two jabs, but yours has not been lengthened. In other words, it all adds up to a pattern of a different thing in every place and with every person. There's no consistency to this at all, Norma.
No, there's not. The other bit of good news, it's a bit personal tonight, really. You've had a smashing show, and I did enjoy the Roger Waters. I thought he was very, very good.
Very special.
I mean, he did say about empathy is the sort of thing that we need. Now, this is empathy because 2 days ago, about very early in the morning, my husband fell over in the bedroom.
Oh, dear.
And it doesn't matter. I mean, it does. But the reason I'm telling you is because I rang a neighbour at that early time who was great, came over with her teenage son, picked him up and helped him. And, you know, it was so good because the help came, and there are some good people around it. It was lovely. And he's not too bad. He's just a bit shaken up, you know.
That is such a beautiful story. And it confirms what Roger was saying and what I have all my life believed, that humanity is essentially good. We are born to be good. Every day, every issue is a struggle between good and bad, between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing. I believe, as a religious believer, that your conscience is your daily communion with God. Your conscience is telling you what the right thing to do is. Some people ignore their conscience. Others are led by their conscience. And I think that Julian Assange is one of those people. That Roger Waters is one of those people. Your neighbours are those people. And if you look at every piece of voluntary work that's done around the country, the people in the churches, the people in the communities, the people in all kinds of societies, not doing anything for money, doing it out of love for their neighbour, out of the goodness of their heart. That, I think, is humanity at its best, and you just experienced it.
Oh, it's good. I mean, I'm not religious, but I do like Jesus.
Who doesn't like Jesus? No, what kind of person couldn't like Jesus? Thank you very much for that, Norma. On that note, loving Jesus is definitely the way to go. And I hope, in Jesus' name, that the persecution of Julian Assange will end tomorrow. That he will not, after all and in the end, be crucified. Because what he did for us. He didn't do it for money or for fame or fortune. Julian Assange revealed great crimes to us for our benefit, so that we could be better. Let's pray for him tonight. I will be. Good night.